Director Brian, can you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Chafe has not joined us yet. Commissioner Dram?
Here.
Commissioner Gitzoni?
Here.
Commissioner Simons?
Here.
Commissioner Zepko also has not joined us yet. Vice Chair Mendez?
Here.
And Chair Keller?
Here.
So we have a quorum of 5 commissioners present.
Very good, thank you. And so, Charlie, did you want to make the announcement for COVID before we do public comments?
Yes.
Okay.
That. Even though, so we don't have to vote on the COVID resolution tonight because we are between planning commission meetings and there are less than 30 days between those 2 meetings, and you will make the findings at both those meetings, and you only have to do it every 30 days, so you don't have to do it tonight. But we still need to read this introductory statement. I would like to state for the record that this meeting is being conducted by teleconference pursuant to newly enacted Assembly Bill 361. The city was previously complying with the Brown Act orders issued by the governor, which were aimed at containing the novel coronavirus and which expired on September 30th. This new bill gives local agencies the authority to continue to host virtual meetings until January 1st, 2024, as long as California is under a governor-declared state of emergency. In order to continue meetings subject to this exemption to the Brown Act, the Planning Commission must make findings by majority vote no later than 30 days after it starts using the exemption and every 30 days thereafter, and did so at the April meeting and will do so again at the May meeting, the May 26th regular meeting, until the governor lifts the state of emergency. City Hall is open to the public during regular business hours, which is 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday through Friday. The planning and building counters have different hours, so please check or make an appointment before visiting. The agenda states that the public may view the meeting that is being live streamed online and on ETV channel 27 and provide comment by submitting an online comment form, which will then be read into the record by staff. The comment form can be accessed by going to our main City of Emeryville Planning Commission webpage and clicking on the link entitled Submit an Online Speaker Card. The public also has the option of participating in tonight's meeting via Zoom and may provide public comment during the meeting using the raise your hand feature visible on your screen, or if you are calling in, press *9. The Zoom call-in information was provided on the posted agenda as well as via e-notification and on social media. And that concludes the introductory statement.
Very good, thank you. So now we will open the meeting up to public comment, and I would just like to preface that this is the time for public comment on items not on tonight's agenda. We have a quite diverse agenda tonight. We'll be talking about parking, child housing balance, incentivizing home ownership, parks and open space, below market rate rental, commercial spaces, and future of Emeryville skyline. So if your comments are on any or a combination of those topics, we ask that you hold your comments until those items come up. So if there's anybody that wishes to address the commission on items not on this agenda, please go ahead and you will be allowed 3 minutes to address the commission. Any online speaker cards?
I do have one online speaker card, which I received earlier in the week, but it is on an item on the agenda. It is on item 5.4, Parks and Open Space. So I will read it when we get to that item. At this point, I do not see any raised hands among the attendees.
Very good, thank you. We will close the public comment section. And now is the time of disclosure of ex parte communications and identifications of conflicts of interest. So the ex parte communications will be on these items that are on the agenda only, not other meetings. Anybody have any ex parte communications? Okay, seeing none, are there any conflicts of interest? I would think there would be. It's a pretty broad-based topic and nothing in specific. So, okay, so I don't see any of those items. So we will move on to the agenda itself.
Chair Keller,
sure.
May I make a few introductory comments?
Yes, please.
Or were you going to?
Nope, go ahead.
All right. I just want to kind of make sure everybody's clear on the ground rules for tonight's meeting. And it was pretty much spelled out in the very brief staff report that we provided for you. But I'd just like to reiterate, and if you don't mind, I'm just going to read what the staff report says. which is that it should be noted that this special Planning Commission meeting is intended to be a general discussion session only. No action is to be taken by the Commission during this meeting, and the Commission should avoid discussing any pending development projects. So any projects that are coming before the Commission in the future for approval, you should not talk about. It's okay to talk about projects that were approved a long time ago, but you shouldn't be talking about any that are upcoming. It should also be noted that the City Council has final jurisdiction over all city policies and programs. The Commission, as you know, is advisory to the Council on planning-related matters. If, following the discussion of any of these items, the Commission wishes to take any actions to make recommendations to the Council on any of the planning-related matters listed on the agenda, that should be agendized for a future Planning Commission meeting. So you should let staff know that you wish to take some kind of an action, and we'll put that on a future agenda at your direction. Also, please note that staff has compiled the information and links that are provided in the staff report. And what that is material that was provided by Commissioners Keller, Gitzoni, and Simons, as well as some additional information that staff thought might be helpful in your discussions. And they're all linked to the agenda, so you should be able to just click on those links and pull up those documents. However, we cannot verify the accuracy or otherwise opine on this material, because some of it anyway, because some of it is from external sources. And it's been provided just to facilitate your discussion. We are certainly available to answer any questions regarding city regulations or city projects as may be necessary. So anybody have any questions on the ground rules for tonight's discussions? All right, that's it from me. Thank you, Chair Keller.
Thank you. And I just want to lay some additional ground rules. We all talked about items that we wanted to place on tonight's agenda. So as we go down the list of items, if the item was on the agenda at your request, we will be asking you to address the item, make a presentation, give us some background, talk about what it is you wanted to discuss, and then we will take it from there. So, and if we find that nobody is prepared or nobody lays claim to an item, we'll just move on to the next item. It's a pretty could be a pretty big agenda if we were to discuss each item in depth, but we will take them each at a time, and we will give each one as its time as needed, and hopefully we'll get through everything as we hit our agenda. Any questions or concerns? Okay. Well, since the first item over parking is something I requested to put on the agenda, I will be the first to go. And we have two reports here I wanted to talk about. Let's see what I can find. Okay. So I had submitted for everyone kind of a report, as staff does, usually to the commission. And the proposal was to examine the amount of parking permitted in new developments. And in that, I talked about the two ordinances that the city passed, one in 2013 and another in 2020. And the 2013 ordinance was reducing, was based on the general plan and reduces the amount of parking allowed in transit or in developed or major transit hubs, particularly Amtrak station and 40th Street in San Pablo. And then in 2020, the City Council adopted an ordinance that reduced or eliminated the parking minimums for Emeryville. So that's kind of the background on that. And since that time, there have been several projects that have come before the commission that are requesting an exemption by a conditional use permit with the goal of exceeding the number of parking spaces. So the discussion here that I want to bring up is the main question: is the 50% reduction allowed for parking in a transit hub overlay too high, too low, or is it just right? It is often expressed that 50% reduction is too great, and that our neighboring jurisdictions do not have such restriction. And to the latter, I don't believe Emeryville has accomplished what it has in the past decades or been recognized as an innovator by following what other cities have done. If we're going to see the changes, it's my opinion that if we're going to see the changes, we need to see someone has to take the lead in that, and that is often to do the things that are difficult to do. So the question before us tonight is a 50% reduction too much? And to examine this, I wanted to ask or look at several factors. Is what is used, what is physically used of our current parking facilities? What is the different percentage between the maximum limit and what is requested? So what is the common percentage? Like, does a developer usually ask for a 10% increase, 20% increase? Is it just a random number that they feel that they can put into a garage and that's what they're asking for? What are the benefits versus the burdens that the city and its population bear when we approve these conditional use permits? And can we be the change we want to see in the world and influence others by maintaining this 50% reduction? So the other questions I wanted to examine and evaluating whether we have the right discussion of parking limits. That's the number of cars that are coming into Emeryville and that we want to accommodate in Emeryville. So I had a couple other things in the packet that I was hoping might facilitate that. So if you guys want any clarifications on what I'm hoping to address here, we can ask that now, or I can move ahead and show some examples of what I'm seeing and what I wanted to talk about. Okay, so let me just, and I might want to share the screen when I get this up. And we could do that, right, Charlie?
You should be able to share your screen.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
If you have difficulty, if it's one of the items, oh, never mind.
I should be able to have that. And that's good.
Yep.
Okay, so what I'm showing here kind of is just a look at one of the parking structures in town that's been, I think, open and available for over a year or more. And this is what it looks like at 10 o'clock in the morning on a Tuesday morning. And as you can see, the whole top is empty. The segment over here to the south side of it facing the brick building is empty. And if you can see through the slots in the windows here, it's pretty empty here. You look at the same picture at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on the same day, everything is still empty. Now, I understand that there's the argument that the pandemic has made a difference in the parking uses, but we need to understand that this particular garage generally parks medical facilities and lab research buildings, which were far less impacted in its stay-at-home orders. They were one of the first businesses to come back. So my opinion is what we're looking at is the current state of the new normal, at least for some time. So it's not just this garage we can witness this in. This is the garage that is owned by Novartis, which is, again, another lab building. We have an 8-story parking structure here. And again, at 10 in the morning, the rooftop is empty. This level here that's exposed is empty. And again, at 3 in the afternoon, it's still empty. And I can say, because of my ability to look at these a little closer, almost everything you can see in these parking structures for at least the top 5 floors is empty. And it's not just commercial structures that are doing this. This is an image of the Avalon apartments around the Upstart Foods. This is Christie Park in front of it. This is at 6 o'clock in the morning. And as you can see, this is all the parking for the apartment, the whole building on this side. It's not the parking for the Avalon North, but this is just when that wraps the building. And again, we're probably looking at maybe 50% of this parking is used. So what I'm questioning is the demand that we're being asked precipitated by need, or is it just to attract tenants and users that they want to provide parking, that the tenants they want to attract feel that there's always going to be parking for the people that they have in their jobs? So I don't think this is a true need. I think it's more a desire and a marketing tool to use for developers rather than an actual need. And again, I base this up with a study that I did when I was working with Transform in their Greenship initiative. I had them come to PPP in March of 2015. Our building has 586 units, and there are 907 parking places here. This provides over 1.5 spaces per unit. but it was found that only 1.2 spaces were used per unit. And this shows that PPP as well is overparked. Now, this is a building that was built in 1986. And still 23% of our parking goes unused in this building. So regardless, again, this is from my empirical research and what I've seen in the areas, but it seems that what we're seeing today in 2020, or even in the mid 2015s and beyond, is that parking demand doesn't exceed what we have. And the studies that I feel that were being presented to us are studies that are nationwide. They're not based in the Bay Area specific. And I believe they're on matrix that were designed a decade, if not more decades ago. And so it doesn't take into account what's happening today with personal transportation, Uber, as well as, a better system. We have more AC transit buses in the city now than when I first started with the Planning Commission. So things have definitely changed from now compared to what was done many, many years ago. And this, again, is backed up. And can you see the new item on the screen? Okay, so this is also backed up by a report done just this year, early in 2020, stating that the Bay Area has twice as much parking as people, and there's a hidden toll. And they say that the new census of the regional parking supply was done by Spur, which is a nonprofit organization in San Francisco that does urban planning and studies. And it's also joined with the Minetta Traffic Institute. And it was the most comprehensive look yet of this ubiquitous transit infrastructure and its unintended consequences. All the parking that undermines the public transit system, worsens housing affordability, and stands in the way of the environmental targets, is what the report found. And it was used of corroborating data from 2017 from the San Francisco Metropolitan Transit Authority that says that the Bay Area actually has 1.9 spaces per person. So for every person that drives their car to work, there's an extra space practically sitting there unused. So I just feel that we're being asked for things that aren't really necessary. And this report summarizes that in the 9 area communities, there are 15 million parking spaces. That's enough to wrap around our planet over 2 times. It's 20% of the unincorporated land in our region is devoted to driving and storing cars. And there are approximately almost 2.5 spaces for every car. Not every person, but every car in the area. So in short, there is far more parking than we need. This excessive parking becomes accepted as the urban landscape, and more residents are likely to drive, increasing carbon emissions. It worsens our climate impact, air pollution, respiratory disease, and the rates of injury and deaths from collisions, and it worsens traffic congestion. So the last thing I wanted to show, if I can find it, it's from our transportation plan. And the one thing I wanted to state here is that about 75% of employees in Emeryville who lived outside of the city drove to work alone in 2000, the most recent year which the data is available. This is higher than the Bay Area average, which is 70%. And free parking is often cited as the primary reason for the high drive alone rate. So the more parking we provide, the more people we're going to have driving to our community because it's easy. So that's primarily the emphasis of what I wanted to discuss on this. And I wanted to get the commission's input and feedback on what they feel of what we've been asked of late and what the new data shows. So is there anyone that wants to ask a question, open discussion?
I'll ask a question.
Go ahead, Commissioner Gitzoni.
Yeah, I have a question. One thing I just wanted to confirm, and I think Charlie might be able to answer this. Do all the commercial spaces, are any of them allowed to have bundled or unbundled parking, or is it all unbundled?
Well, I think it depends on when they were approved. We have had a requirement for unbundled parking in our regulations since 2013, but a lot of the existing development was approved or built before that, so those regulations would not apply to them. And frankly, I'm not 100% sure if that requirement is only for residential or if it's for all uses, but if you want to continue your discussion, I'll take a quick look at the planning regulations and let you know what it says about that.
Okay, because I think to me that bears heavily on what Chair Keller is talking with, where I see a question of like induced demand and cheap or free parking is heavily going to induce demand.
Commissioner Chig.
Thank you so much for all of the information that you presented. I guess my question is like, so where do we go from here? What are the possible mechanisms? Do you have anything in mind, direction that you'd like to see?
For myself, this came up because in a discussion with a council member, and a discussion with Charlie, is the fact that the way we came up with the 50% reduction, it's felt that that wasn't fully vetted and that it may be too much. My contention is that in looking at projects that have come before us that may not have been approved yet or others that have, is that when we're asked to increase the amount of parking, it's not by that much. And there are other developments that have come to us that have not asked for more parking than what is allowed. So my contention is, based on what I'm seeing in the available parking in our city and what we've been asked for, I don't feel that 50% is too much. I feel that we can make the educated guess that it's appropriate, and that when we get requests from developers, that they quantify their need by more than just a study that was based on matrices that were designed a decade or more ago. That we really need to see, what is it that's driving your need? Why do you need, randomly 100 more parking spaces than is allowed by our current code? And I think that that's the measure I think we need to add, is what is their basis for adding or requesting more, and should we grant that conditional use permit? Vice Chair Mendez.
Yeah, I have a question for, maybe this is for staff. So I know that there are some apartment complexes that have, I don't know if there are agreements with like businesses where they are able to use their parking structures during business hours. Is this something that's written in our guidelines? Is it, how is that, or is that just kind of an agreement that's done privately between the developer of an office building and an apartment complex? Like, how does that work, and how can we encourage more of that?
Chair Keller, I can take a stab at this.
Please do.
Let me get back to Commissioner Gitzoni. I did check on the unbundled. And by the way, the first document that is linked on the staff report is the current parking and loading regulations from the planning regulations. I know it's kind of a lengthy document and it's pretty dense in terms of regulatory language, but the answers to a lot of these questions are in that document. Concerning unbundled parking, that applies to new multi-unit residential projects of 10 units or more. So it does not apply to non-residential projects.
So commercial, I just want to clarify, so commercial places can have exclusive use and not open it to anyone else if they choose. Right.
Yeah, it's not that they can't unbundle it if they want to, but they don't have to. But new residential projects of 10 units or more have to unbundle their parking. Concerning shared parking, there is a section in the planning regulations about that. In fact, there's a table that sort of shows an example. And what that table shows, which is based on information that's in the literature, in the parking generation manual and so forth, is that the parking demand for different uses varies by time of day. So for residential, it's higher certain time and higher at night, and for office it's higher during the day. And if you do a table that shows the amount of parking that is demanded for, say, an office use and a residential use, and you add up the total demand throughout the day, you can find the kind of sweet spot, which is the maximum parking demand for both uses, which typically is lower than the maximum demand for either one separately. So in other words, you can save parking spaces by combining and sharing the parking that way. And the code simply says that this is allowed, that you can do this. It doesn't say you have to, but it does allow for it, and it provides an example of how to figure it out.
Very good. Does that answer? Commissioner Simons, I'm going to call on you first, but let me make sure that or next. So just make sure Commissioner Chafe and Vice Chair Mendez have their questions answered. Okay. Okay. So Commissioner Simons.
Thanks, Chair Keller. So just a couple of thoughts that I have about this topic. So I think this is really important. I think it's really great that we're spending the time to think about how we get sort of the least amount of parking possible, which I think long-term is really good for the city. I think there are really three relevant parties here. There's us, the commission, there's the developer, and then there's the lender who's giving the developer the money to go make it all happen. And I think my general idea is that I hope we're approving projects that align best with the city's goals, and also work for the developer and work for the lender, because we've seen what happens when, just in the last year, when commercial projects are brought to our city, that what we approve does not work with the bank and the project doesn't happen. So I think what we need to think about here is how close do we want to be riding that line between viable and non-viable. And I'd love to think about, what we as a commission would be willing to give up in order to get less parking. I think long-term, less parking, more housing is going to make such a tremendous difference in, from our livability goals to our climate goals to our vehicle mileage travels goals, that producing less parking is just incredibly high on the list. And I'd be just willing to give up lots of things, high quality of design, height limits, affordable housing contribution. I don't know. We just need to think about what are we willing to play with, because there's lots of moving parts here, and I think reducing parking is a really big deal. We just need to work with people proposing these projects to think about how do we make it happen. I think really the way to do that is to just change the rules and see what we get, and hope, do it for 5 years, see if it goes well, see if it goes less well, and just really think of this as just one big experiment we're constantly running to produce a better and better city with lots of different variables we can manipulate. Thank you.
I like that comment a lot. I like the fact that everything we do kind of when we write new ordinances and change things is an experiment. Basically everything, because life is an experiment. It evolves every day as you go along. So I like what I heard what you said about, if you tell a developer, hey, you need this much parking. We don't feel you need that much parking. But if it helps you to, let you add a floor or reduce, some element of this, I think that's the kind of give and take that we need to do. I think that's a very good way of looking at this. What are you willing, what would you ask us to take off the table that we want in order to make less parking? Because I really think that if we're going to meet our planet goals, which we have not done, and I don't mean us as a city, I mean a society in general, we have not made any inroads into less traffic. Gas is $6 a gallon now, and the freeway is still bumper to bumper. So it's people are going to drive their car as long as they can find a place to park it. And when it becomes difficult to park, because at the university, we call it a hunting permit. When you drive your car to the university, you are not guaranteed a spot. And let me tell you, they are diminishing parking there less and more and more. And I specifically don't drive, or never started driving, because I wasn't going to pay $100 for a hunting license. It was just not worth it. So when you incentivize things in a financial way, and you make it more difficult that, I know I can go in that garage, I might have to park on the roof, but I'm going to find a place to park and I can walk across the street to my job. You're going to drive your car because it's just simpler. And that's my opinion. And I think that's what's our job is to, the city council has made this ordinance that is 50% below. And until they evaluate it and change it, to me, that is our edict. We are to work with the general plan and the ordinances. And we were told that people get 50% less in these areas. And I feel that, it's the onus of the developer to, financing, finding tenants, that's their problem. Creating a city that is good for our city, that's our responsibility. And to follow the general plan is our guidelines. So I brought this up to just say that I feel that the 50% is what the city council has put in as the ordinance. I feel it's appropriate. And I think at this time, we really need to stick with that and see. And I don't, like I said, I've looked at a lot of plans and they have asked for little over the amount and sometimes not over the amount. So I don't think it's infeasible by what's been brought to us in the past. Not everything, of course. I mean, we can go talk about biomed, but biomed was basically approved in the late 90s. And that we had to work with an existing plan with that, because had they not had that, I would not have, supported the amount of parking we given them. Even though we got them down from what they were allowed, I still wouldn't have given them what they had. But that's a whole different story when you talk about that project. But I think going forward, if we're going to really, the one thing I hear from everybody about this city is traffic. People don't come to Bay Street because the traffic's so horrible here. And until we address that, and we do that by making it more attractive to take public transit and less attractive to park cars, we're never going to address the problem. So those are my feelings about it. So before we move on, Charlie, is this kind of a good format? Are we kind of doing what you guys need?
Sure. This is your discussion, and
okay.
It's interesting.
Okay. So there is nothing more on this because we do have quite a few items. We can move on to the next item.
Chair Keller, I just wanted to kind of go off of Commissioner Simon's, and are we able to add a category of bonus points if like the developer is able to reduce parking to even less than 50%? So if they're able to reduce it, to 40% or 30%, then they get more bonus points for XYZ.
Could that fall under the community benefits, Charlie? I know it'd have to go to council, but yeah, we could put that as a community benefit, that we're getting less cars.
Absolutely.
Okay, yeah, that's a good way to look at that. Yeah, that would be one way to incentivize it. Very good, thank you. Okay. Let's see. So the next item on parking would be guidelines and criteria for the 50% reduction in transit hubs. I don't know if that ties into the one I brought, or was that someone else's wish to delve deeper?
I believe that was your item, Chair Keller, and I feel like you've just been discussing that.
Yeah, I think if it's my item, I'm satisfied with what we've discussed from that. Okay, and then methodology of estimating parking demand. Who would like to take ownership of that?
This was Commissioner Gitzoni's request, and he did provide a couple of documents that were linked to the staff report.
Great. Commissioner Gitzoni, would you like to tell us about this?
Yeah, so I'm still, there's a lot to it, and I'm just kind of starting to learn about it, but I kind of was initially really struck by, and some of the issues that some of the projects we've looked at in the past, that there would be a discrepancy between the ITE estimate and the city's estimate. And so I started just kind of looking into whether or not, these things are considered very exact. And I was finding things like with the American Planning Association, there's a lot of discussion, and they even published a pretty hefty book questioning the IT's methodology. And then, so I put in an article by that author who does that. And without going into detail, a lot of it seems to sometimes write on very small samples. It's writing on samples that are under conditions that you don't really have a lot of detail about, and they may not resemble our environment. One of the things that's not present in a lot of the models that they have for parking generation is whether it's near a lot of mass transit, or what sort of thing it is. And then the second example I put in there, and this is still something that I don't know how accurate it is, but it's an example of a service that is really taking a look at the region and trying to evaluate, when you're talking about a project in this specific part of the city, how does that interact with things that are in other nearby areas? And I think that sort of dynamic, it seems to make a lot of sense to me, that if we're looking at a model, that it should be comprehensive. And this is an organic process. And if you're right next to a BART station, your parking need is really different than if you're you know, in some place like Walnut Creek and not near a BART station, you know, and you're near just highway exits. And so I feel a lot of times we see these ITE figures, and I look at them, and then they have these like really these ratio of like reliability and change on the index of like as it goes, and it often is a very low ratio. So my main thing there was I just wanted to, I don't have any answers, but I just feel like maybe we look a little too easily when we go and look at these ITE numbers, and I kind of think maybe we should treat that with a little more apprehension and try to figure out what would be, if there is, a more accurate way of coming up with parking generation. I mean, we're looking at numbers that people, in a way, seem to be pulling out of the air because the model is questioned. But I don't know that there's a better model. But the thing that I showed in the second example, where you're really looking at the interaction of the region and the specific siting of a parking project, makes a lot of sense to me.
Thank you. I agree with that. And Charlie, I ask you more about the ITE report and see what you could give us in the background. I've always kind of seen it, and I definitely will admit that I could be mistaken about this, but I kind of see it more as a suburban way of looking at needs and parking rather than an urban way. And I also get frustrated with the way these people discount Emeryville because it doesn't have a BART station. There are lots of cities in the Bay Area that don't have a BART station. BART is not the only transit. Myself, I mean, I think everyone knows I'm a very big transit user, and I very rarely ride BART anymore. I find AC Transit gets me to San Francisco much faster than BART does. And so I wonder, as Commissioner Gitzwin does the ITE report really reflect and show us what the needs in Emeryville or even the greater East Bay is, or is it just a real general way of studying things? And that's what I was alluding to in my remarks, that the matrix, I think, is old. And to me, a decade could be old in this type of information, especially in the age of information. I don't think anything that's 15 to 20 years old is really relevant at all to what we need today. So is there anything you can enlighten us about on the ITE report or what we use?
Well, I'm not sure. It's true that the parking demand estimates that are in the planning regulations are primarily based on ITE. This was over a decade ago that, as you said, Chair Keller, that these regulations were drafted. I believe we attempted to use the urban figures as much as possible. I would also note that since the minimum parking requirements have been eliminated, it kind of really doesn't matter what the estimated parking demand is, because you don't really have to provide any parking anyway. There's only a couple of things where it's really relevant. Well, there's several things. One, of course, is the maximum. So if the estimated parking demand is wrong, then that presumably means that the maximum number is wrong. So we could have a lower or a higher maximum than what we should have if we were to revise the estimated parking demand. Secondly, disabled parking under the recently adopted amendments to the code is based on estimated parking demand. So even if a developer chooses not to provide any parking at all, they still are required to provide accessible parking. And the amount of accessible parking is based on the building code requirement for the estimated parking demand. So for example, if the estimated parking demand for your project was 100 spaces and you didn't provide any spaces, and the building code said if you provided 100 spaces, you have to have 2 accessible spaces, then you would have to have 2 accessible spaces. You wouldn't have to provide any other parking, but you would have to provide those 2 accessible spaces. So that's another thing that the estimated parking demand is used for. And the third thing, at least the way the code is currently written, the bicycle parking requirement is based on the estimated automobile parking demand. And if the estimated automobile parking demand is wrong, then that could affect the amount of bicycle parking. I will say that may have the opposite effect of what we intend, because if we find that the estimated parking demand is too high because the ITE rates are all suburban and you lower them, then you're also lowering the bicycle parking requirement, which I don't think is what we want to do. We are working on amendments as part of the active transportation plan, and maybe Navar can provide some further insights on that. But we are developing modifications to the bicycle parking requirements. We might want to unlink them from the estimated auto parking demand. I'm not sure what we base them on in that case, but perhaps we could unlink them. So there are some implications of modifying the estimated parking demand. I will also say, if we were to undertake a comprehensive overhaul of the estimated parking demand, because it's extensive, every single use classification that's listed in the planning regulations has an estimated parking demand associated with it. And if you looked at it, that table goes on for pages and pages. If we were to undertake a comprehensive overhaul of all of those numbers, we would need to hire a consultant, and that would take a period of months at least to do that. And given the limited use of it right now, I'm not sure that's the best use of our limited resources.
I agree at that point. Navar, do you think there's anything you could add to the active transportation plan right now, or what we're working on for bicycle parking and handicap?
I'm sorry, I'm having a lot of background noise. Maria, can you repeat your question?
I was just wondering if you had anything to add to the changes that we might be developing in the active transportation plan for figuring our bicycle parking demand.
Not yet. I have not had the chance to research it at this point.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Just a minute, Commissioner Gates. So I just want to, Charlie, I think what you said is important, and I understand all of it. My thing is even though we don't require any parking, I have not yet seen a project come before us that didn't ask for parking. At least it's maximum, if not over. So I think, what I'd like to do is find a way to accurately determine what our need is. And to me, what that would be is to do a simple study like Transform did, and actually go to our garages and see what's used and find out what is our true demand compared to, street parking. Because it's interesting that, Shelmont Street used to be bumper to bumper car park for days on end. And the minute we put in the 2 hour limit, there's spaces all along Shelmont. Those cars have gone somewhere. And so I would like to see what our demand is. What is it really in Emeryville? And I don't know that would need a wholesale review of, the whole methodology and what we use, but something along those lines. Commissioner Gietson?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to my earlier comments, and particularly if we're looking at re-estimating what parking demand is, one of the things I found a number of people mentioned is that one of the biggest factors in parking demand is cost to the end user. If you charge for parking, if you require commercial spaces to charge for parking and not give employees free parking, the demand goes down quite a bit. More so than other costs, and I'm assuming that gas and things like that are in the other costs. But if people suddenly find that parking for the day costs more than their AC transit fare, they start taking AC transit. And so I think if we do re-estimate it, we should build an assumption that we would charge market rates for parking rather than just giving it as a free thing.
Very good. Any other comments from the commission?
Could I comment on that?
Sure. Yeah.
We traditionally have not dictated to developers how they need to manage their parking, with the exception of the unbundled parking for the residential projects. So we have not told developers they have to charge, or they may not charge, or how they have to assign their parking, or anything like that. I think there might be some legal implications of that, and I don't know if Christy wants to weigh in, but that's another kind of can of worms that if we were given direction to go down that path, we would need to do a lot of research on it.
I'd say that's a good answer for right now, and absent any current regulations to, require developers to do certain things once their parking is in place. That's not something that we could do just via a condition of approval at this point.
Okay, anybody else? So we can move on to something that's very close to what Director Bryant and our city attorney alluded to, which is a citywide parking tax on private parking lots. And again, this is my item. So we will open that can of worms as Director Bryant had suggested. And what I will do is, first I'll just kind of lay the groundwork. Oops, trying to find my report here. So to lay the groundwork, this is the subject of a citywide parking tax on private commercial properties. And the proposal here is to collect a per space tax on parking spaces located in private commercial non-residential properties. Now this is just a first look at a proposal this is a first look at the proposal to tax property owners with the intention to charge end users for parking as a form of congestion pricing or management to discourage single occupant vehicles. Now, before we get too far into this, this would be a tax. This would be a tax that would require to go to the voters and be approved. So this is something that we're well aware of. That's not something the city can decide to do and do that. But the city can decide to create this tax and put it to the voters. The city council has that purview to do that. So since the adoption of the general plan in 2009, the city has looked for ways and methods to reduce the amount of single occupant vehicles coming into Emeryville. So the discussion here is a parking tax has several advantages over tolls such as a bridge or something like that in cities that have any geographical makeup. We don't have to have a bay or a river separating us to do us a per space tax. And the intention again of this program is a tax to primarily make driving, particularly the single occupant vehicle, more costly and thus less attractive, while allowing those who choose this mode to do so, but pay the cost of doing so. Well, this per space tax has many benefits, primarily creating a revenue source that is controlled by the city and not the state, county, or federal governments. And following is a list of the benefits that this program can bring. I believe that the parking tax would reduce the number of single occupant vehicles coming into Emeryville, as we alluded to in the previous conversation. It could reduce or eliminate the need of the Property-Based Improvement District, the PBID, and its restrictions and controls, and allow Emeryville to use all funds as directed by City Council and the laws written into the program. FYI, the PBID is main funding of the Emeryville round. This would also encourage private property owners to unbundle their parking and reduce the need for new additional parking. Again, as Charlie thankfully checked on our regulations, commercial property owners do not have to unbundle their parking. They can leave it strictly used by their employees or their lease tenants. This could also create a large revenue stream totally for and in control of Emeryville. It supports city plans such as the general plan, the sustainable transportation plan, and the climate action plan. The collected funds can support items on our capital improvement program. The program would have minimal effect on the residents themselves in Emeryville and could eliminate the PBID tax on Emeryville properties, which is also now taxed on residential properties. The program can directly connect the cost to the users and not the property owners. Capital and ongoing costs for the city and the property owners would be very low. It would create a truly viable congestion management tool for Emeryville. The actual collection of fees and the system for collecting the parking is responsibility of the property owner and not something the city has to manage. And it provides a reliable and ongoing funding source for the Emeryville round and other transit systems. Paid parking on private facilities is not a new concept. Many cities collect parking fees, as do private property owners. There are several private parking facilities in Emeryville that charge for parking. I can count 10 at least. This information provides ideas to open the discussion on the topic of how to reduce the amount of single occupant vehicles coming into Emeryville and reduce the growth and need for more parking in place of building homes that serve people and not cars. So in part of the information that I included were several kind of intense data information. So I don't want to go on and berate these subjects. But this is something I've been looking at for probably over 10 years. And if you had a chance to look at the Excel spreadsheet I showed showing an estimated number of commercial parking spaces we have in Emeryville, the city could, in the last 10 years, could have collected almost $10 million a year. That at the end of 2022, that would have been $100 million that we could have collected from people driving to our city. It wouldn't have been taxed directly to the property owners. It wouldn't have been taxed to the city residents in any way. It would have been taxed to the people driving into our city. The plan that I had suggested also provides two incentives. It provides an incentive for property owners to unbundle their commercial parking for every space that they allowed to use by the general public or people in off hours. Their rate would go down by 50%. Or if they took parking off the rolls altogether, converted it into other uses, they'd pay no tax on that at all. So the system is designed to give property owners an incentive to help whatever parking problem we may have by providing parking to other spaces who don't have enough by unbundling their parking, when now they're not required to do that. So those are just a couple of the I wanted to stay at a high level. I mean, I have gotten into some details on this program in the years that I've developed it. It has changed a little bit, but we have also now added new parking spaces to our rules, and I'm very confident that even if we reduced some of the parking that exists, we could still easily make $10 million a year, which is totally under the control of Emeryville. The state couldn't decide to pull it back and not give it to us anymore. And the thing is I would just like to have a conversation, open public conversation on this. And this, I think, is the good place to start. So what I'd like to do is see if the commissioners have any thoughts, questions on it. And the things that I hear often is that the property owners would have a fit. They couldn't do as they say, the charging for parking is just unheard of, and it would drive business away. So by way of, again, sharing my screen, I'll just show you a couple of the things that we have already in. Now, these photos were taken way back, I think in 2014 or something, but 2100 Powell Street, the high rise, they charge $1.50 for 20 minutes. This proposal is charged $2 a day. So a property owner would pay $60 a month for every parking stall they have. And so for the four that I'm showing here, the average cost per day is $10 to $13. So $2 a day isn't even market rate. And again, showing Bay Street, I think I looked at their website today, they charge $2 just for 3 hours, not for a whole day. And so this just goes to show that people are already charging for parking. It's just that the city of Emeryville is not getting any of that. And we're paying the price for all these cars coming into our city. And yet we're reaping none of the potential benefits of collecting this, so we could apply this money to better transit, better options, and encourage people to do something else other than driving, as well as create a revenue source. So I would like to see this get a bigger public discussion, but I'm certainly would like to hear what people think of it here. Vice Chair Mendez?
Thank you, Chair Keller. It actually got me thinking that a lot of apartment complexes already do this. They charge their residents. For example, at my apartment complex, we have different types of parking, and depending on which one you have, it's anywhere from $75 a month to $150 a month. So it's not something unheard of for the residents already. So, as far as having it apply to commercial buildings as well, I don't see it being something that's so radical that, it'll it'll get completely tossed out.
Mhm.
I do feel like something like that is not out of the normal.
And years ago, I talked to a major property owner in Emeryville, and I asked him, I said, would you really see a problem with having to charge this? He says, I don't have a problem with this as long as the city doesn't cap on what I'm allowed to collect. As long as they don't govern what I can collect for parking spaces, I wouldn't have a problem with it. So that's the sense I've got from other developers and property owners, is that charging the people who park in these spaces isn't such a problem. But it's just one person, but I've talked to other people in the city. I've even had a meeting with the city manager on this, and they're concerned that it'll chase away business and that it will be a problem. But I don't see that as a fact, because there are already several garages in Emeryville that are doing this. We're just not seeing the benefits ourselves. So that was kind of it in a nutshell. We don't have to berate the topic. I just wanted to see what the sense of what people felt, the viability and the possibility. It is something that would have to go to the voters, but I think as Emeryville residents would benefit from this by having better transit. We could use this to improve bicycling. We could use this to improve streets. We could use this money in all sorts of different ways. So I don't think that if it were to go to the residents that they would have a problem. Because people say, oh, if I drive to a shopping center, I'm gonna have to pay to park. Well, if you go to Bay Street, you already do. And you pay a lot more than this. So, I just don't see that there's any validity to the argument that it's going to hamper business or cause problems. Because Berkeley charges parking in almost every garage. Commissioner Chapin?
Thanks, Chair Keller. This is all really interesting. I mean, I think I'd just like to emphasize too the link between trying to change behavior and the need to improve transit options too, right? Like we have to give an alternative. I mean, many of us live in the city and shop close by, but there are others that are coming from outside and they need a way to get here. And we are so lucky that we already have Emery-Go-Round as a framework that we can work with, right? It's something that we can invest in that already exists and we can make it better. And so that's what I find really compelling is, the opportunity to improve the offerings that we already have of ways to move around the city that don't involve private vehicles. And you've named bicycling as another one too. So I think there are many places where we could potentially direct new revenue to increase quality of life and to incorporate some of those external costs that you're talking about that come with driving. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, the thing is from what I understand, the PBID, which that finances Emeryville, is constantly in fear of making enough money to fund it currently, let alone expand it or improve the growth. And so I think that in itself, this would be a constant steady stream that we wouldn't have to depend on. And I also understand that, the city is currently in our financial situation with COVID and everything else that we're having, that the city is looking at other ways to collect more revenue. And I think this, as I said, in my calculations from what I did back in 2012, this is $10 million a year that the city can count on. And I think it's even higher now because there are several garages that have opened since I done this count. So I think rather than looking at ways to tax certain segments of the population, which then only taxes them but doesn't bring any benefits to the community at large, this collects a large sum of tax and hopefully incentivizes people so that they don't drive to our city, and it improves the transit for everybody, those of us who live here, those of us that work here, and those of us that visit here. So I think it's a win-win, and the thing I find is that I think this is something that bears serious consideration at looking into, because as I said, this is very high level. I've gone into some specifics on how we can incentivize, taking parking spaces out the rules, incentivize unbundled parking. And the way I see it, it's a win-win-win. I don't see anything negative about this, but yet there's just no interest in the city to look at this, and I don't understand, what the difficulty is, but I think this is something that, should have a serious look. So beyond any other questions, Commissioner Bizzoni.
Yes, thank you, Chair Keller. I just wanted to say I really like this idea. And I also wanted to point out that by disincentivizing driving, that it also improves transit by improving demand for it, and also less driving, less traffic improves the quality of transit as well. I mean, right now around the holidays, going over by Bay Street, transit is awful, and I ride through that area twice a day at least on transit, and you can tell it's when traffic is heavy, it deteriorates the quality of transit. So that's good in several ways. This would be a big improvement.
Yes, it is, and that's part of some of the other media that I had that I was really trying not to overload you guys on. But in the Sustainable Transportation Plan that I quoted earlier, it says the Emeryville round experiences variations in travel times up to 30% due to traffic congestion during peak travel times. So yeah, if we could reduce the amount of single occupant vehicles coming in here and provide better transit, then our other transit could operate more efficiently. And that's a pretty much known commodity. But thank you for bringing that up. I think that's another added benefit that I didn't mention in my list. Okay, so to keep our agenda moving on, if there are no more comments, I can find my pointer here. I don't know why sometimes it disappears. It's really weird. It's like totally gone. There it is. Okay, so the next agenda item is future conversion of parking garages to other uses. Whose item was that?
I'm happy to speak to it really briefly, Chair Keller.
Okay.
So I think this is something that's come up in our discussions, and I understand from the staff reports that we've seen that staff may be thinking about this as well. And I think so far we've kind of just talked about it as a sort of abstract concept that we anticipate in the future that there's going to be less demand for parking. And so a lot of the infrastructure that continues to be built around cars and for cars right now will be obsolete soon, within potentially 10 years-ish, and others might have other ideas about the exact timeline. And so the question is, how can we see that coming and provide direction to project proponents that will help us have the best city possible and the least waste of resources in terms of building a structure that won't be needed. And I think it also gets to the use of land for basically storing cars. And so I've done some quick searches about this. I don't really have much to say today about it, but there's some really creative work that's been done in other cities. I saw, for example, a residential development that was built in a former parking garage. So it can be done. There can be a lot of uses for parking garages. And I think what's most interesting to me is how can we anticipate that? And are there any sort of design elements or direction that we as a city should be providing that will make it easier to convert those parking garages to other uses, either in the near term or in the longer term as a completely different type of structure. I think we all know that deconstructing buildings, tearing down buildings is a huge waste, right? It takes a huge amount of resources. It wastes a huge amount of resources. We'd like to avoid it, I think, at all costs possible. So, what is it that we can do now to anticipate that? That's kind of what's on my mind. And again, I don't really have a proposal, but it might be worth looking into what other cities are doing, or maybe someone here has an idea of what other cities are doing more specifically to help with this issue.
Yeah, I think that's really good. I think, I lost my train of thought. I'm wondering if it's something that we could tie to the community benefits. Can somebody get bonus points for building a parking structure that's easily convertible? That's one way that we could look at it. And we have an example, and I'm going to ask our legal counsel if this is okay to bring up. I want to talk about a project that was proposed but has been withdrawn, but they were making a certain proposal that I'd like to reference. Since that project's been withdrawn and isn't going to happen, can I make reference to that?
Yeah, as long as there's nothing pending before you, I'm fine with that.
Okay, well, it's the 5850 project. When it was first proposed as a full 8-story apartment building, and the developer at that time, which was Bill Schrader, was willing to offer us that. He wanted more parking than what was allowed. His contention was if parcel B at the public market develop their apartments, they were going to have a higher parking ratio than we would allow him to have. So he was wanting more parking, but he in the proposal was saying, I will commit to saying all these spaces on this side of the building can be converted to live units. So that's a proposal that has come directly to us before. And I know, as Commissioner Chake referenced, other cities have done that in other places. So I think that's maybe something, again, we could look at if the developer is willing to do something like that, that we provide them maybe some bonus points, maybe not a lot, because it's not a guarantee that it's going to happen. But if they spend the money to make part of their parking garage easily convertible, then I think perhaps maybe they should get bonus points for that. At least one way to start the conversation. Anybody else have any thoughts on that? Vice Chair Mendez.
Yeah, so I kind of thought about this a little bit in the past, and I thought like a good conversion for a parking garage would be housing, because you could use part of it. I mean, it's already a parking structure, so, and already has the infrastructure to move cars up a structure. So you would be able to bring cars right up to your front door. And so I think housing is a good fit for converting parking garages. And yeah, I agree that I think, you know, in 10 years, definitely in 20 years, we are not gonna, the need for parking garages is not gonna be what it is right now. And so we do need to start thinking about how we can start putting in the infrastructure so that these can be converted later on.
Very good. Any other commission comments? Commissioner Simmons.
Thanks, Chair Keller. I just have a very brief comment. I feel like one of my big lessons on the Planning Commission is just really starting to pay attention to the amount of inertia and lock-in that happens once you build things. I know, I drive to see my mom in Berkeley Hills and drive through Central Berkeley, and there's just blocks and blocks and blocks of abandoned industrial space, close to the world's #1 public university that remains abandoned decade after decade. So I'd be very wary about giving developers any out.
No, it's not.
Sort of an idea of transitioning a parking lot into apartments. I think really we should be trying to produce as few as possible. And I think we have a range of ways for making that happen. And I think when we're thinking about in 20 years, why are people cars won't be around? I don't think I'm like, well, what's going to happen? How's that going to happen? That just seems like very aspirational. I think we're all committed to making that happen. But, Uber turned out to be terrible for cities, and that was a big fantasy. And we lost 10 years of investment in public transit by thinking rideshare was the future. And I think we should just be very cautious about banking on future technologies that are challenging. So, thank you.
Thank you so much. And I agree on that, because I think the pandemic has also taught us that, a lot of people that are on the freeway, I think, businesses aren't back to usual with full employees, but yet the freeway is totally backed up. And my contention on that is people are afraid to use public transit still. So I think cars are going to be with us for a while, but I think, as you do, that we need to incentivize that people make choices, and what people usually make choices are based on their wallet. But I think that, as you said earlier, on getting financing, it's difficult. So I think if the developer is telling us that I need this parking right now to get the financing, that we might have to respect that, but also encourage them somehow to make a structure that is easily convertible to housing. Put it in a place where you can open it up to, houses on the street or something like that. So I think, we have to learn how to walk the line on both sides and think of, what can we do as policy people to encourage that and to set it up that way. Director Bryan, anything you wanted to add? Now you can
Sorry, I'm looking for the mute button there. No, I did not have anything I wanted to add on this item.
You could just shake your head no. Anyone else? Okay, so seeing none on that, we'll go to the last parking item, which is the including of parking in the floor area ratio. Who wants to claim that subject?
I propose that,
Okay,
and that is, I guess, akin to the idea of taxing parking spaces. The idea is that when we're trying to figure out what is the optimal mass for land use and things like that, why would parking not count? You know, it also is part of the physical mass and structure of a building, and somehow we're giving it a free pass. So it seems to me you might want to give it a different weight because it may not be the same weight as office space or residential space, but it does seem to me like it shouldn't just be something where you can just build endless amounts of it and not have it count as your floor area ratio. So, and that's just that thought.
so your thought is not maybe a 1-to-1 like we do count the floor area ratio for commercial property or housing, but yet it has some quantifiable amount towards the FAR. It may be, a fraction of a percent or something like that, but it should be considered.
Exactly. It doesn't have to be the same, but it should not be zero, I think.
Yeah, okay. Any other thoughts on that? I agree with that. I think if it were 1-to-1, you would just, that kind of would be impossible. You would never get anything built because some places do require some parking. But I think, a way of looking at the impacts of the amount of parking to a floor area ratio of the building, I think should have some consideration. I can see that and agree with that.
Chair Keller, I can comment on this.
Okay.
Back when we were developing the current general plan, which, as you all know, was adopted in October 2009. So this was sometime during the 5 years leading up to that. I think it was probably towards the end of 2008, early 2009. And we were developing the citywide map of floor area ratios and, thinking about the policies about that and so forth. The original proposal was to include parking and loading in floor area ratio. And an argument about that is that if you look at some of those parking garages that you showed pictures of earlier, Chair Keller, those all have an FAR basically of 0, except for, the Griffiths garage is 0. The Heritage Square garage has a little bit of commercial space on the ground floor, so it's got a very small FAR. I can't remember what the reasoning was, but I do remember that at the time, the General Plan Update Steering Committee and the Planning Commission and the City Council debated the issue and decided that parking and loading should not be included in floor area ratio. Maybe partly because basically what most other cities do, it's kind of the state of the practice is that people don't count parking and loading towards FAR. One reason for that is that if you call it floor area, then typically you require parking for floor area. So you'd be requiring parking for parking, which doesn't make sense. That's easy enough to fix. You just say, excluding parking in the calculation. Another thing is that parking garages are often open. The sides are often open in order to get ventilation. And by that standard, they probably would not be counted as habitable space by the building code. And typically things that count as floor area under the planning regulations are also things that are considered habitable space under the building code. So there's issues about that. I will note that we had a much higher FAR proposed citywide on the various maps when we were initially counting parking as floor area, because we had to include the parking structures in the new buildings that would get built. And if you didn't make the FARs higher, then you would be building, basically the rest of the building would end up being smaller. So when we eliminated parking from the FAR,
the maps got a commensurate reduction in the FAR numbers that are on them, which disappointed some developers because they were thinking, gee, if you don't count parking towards FAR, but you leave the maps the way they are, I can build some really big buildings. But we made that adjustment as well. Again, I can't remember what the reasoning was, but it was debated over a decade ago before we adopted the general plan.
Okay, thank you for that background. And it might be something that is worth looking into again, and it may not be necessarily for area ratio, but I agree with Commissioner Gitzoni that the square footage and the footprint that parking takes up, I think needs to have some quantifiable value put on, what we're building and how much, land it takes up that we're not allowed to put housing or jobs or something on that we just park cars in. So I think it's a very viable point of discussion anyway, I think.
I would note that the maximum parking requirement, which you previously discussed, also has a similar effect, although that would also apply to surface parking, but most parking is in structures. So if you put a cap on the amount of parking you can provide, that has a similar effect if you counted it towards FAR.
True. Alrighty, very good. Any other commissioner comments or questions? Okay, I think we're done with parking. And now we'll go on to our next meaty subject, which is the job housing balance. And
Chair Keller, could you take public comment for 5.1 so that we do
Yes, I did totally forget to do that. So
you can do it at the beginning or the end of each. I don't care.
Okay, I think we discussed we wanted to do it at the beginning, so I'll do that. Yeah, so why don't we go ahead, excuse me, and open up the public comment on parking in Emeryville and allow any community member who wants to talk to the commission on parking, there are 3 minutes to give us their thoughts. Any desire to do so, Charlie?
I do not see any online speaker cards in my email, and there are no attendees who have raised their hands.
Very good. Okay, we will close the public comment on that subject, and we will open public comment on the job housing balance. Are there any community members who wish to address the commission on the topic of the job housing balance?
Once again, I have no online speaker cards on this topic, and I do not see any raised hands among the attendees.
Okay, very good. We will close the public comment period on this subject, bring it back to the commission, and start with the current jobs housing balance. And is that you, Mr. Commissioner Simons?
I think it is. Thank you so much, Chair Keller. And if other folks are comfortable with it, I'm happy to address each of these bullet points all together. If that works for people. So I wanted to bring our jobs housing balance or imbalance as an item discussed before all of us tonight, because I think it is one of the big reasons, one of the big factors that influences, downstream a lot of effects that we're all dealing with. Over the last 10 years, the Bay Area as a whole has created 3 jobs for every one house that's created. And we know what this has led to: unaffordable housing, terrible commutes, terrible air quality, very, very, very low quality of life. So I thought it would be a really great idea for us to be given information with each item that's brought before us about the implications for Emeryville's jobs, housing, and balance. Basically, every job that we're producing here in Emeryville, I assume the person who's working at it, if it's a biotech job, they're, maybe living between, Richmond and San Leandro or whatever, and everyone else is living in Antioch because housing has just gotten so incredibly expensive, and that's where, or Antioch or Vallejo, that's where folks are able to live who are lower income. And I think we really need to think about that. My thought was staff could give a very brief rundown of Emeryville's current jobs, housing, and balance, the number of jobs that would, or houses that would be created with each project, what that would shift our jobs, housing, and balance to, would make it better or worse for affordability. And that finally, after the project is complete, how many more houses we would have to produce to get ourselves back to the format, our previous jobs housing balance before before the project was proposed. There's lots of really great research on the connection between number of housing units and number of jobs related to affordability. A lot of parts of the country that have much more affordable housing have ratios of almost 1-to-1. Emeryville is much less balanced than that. And I think since I know many of us are concerned about biking, walking, and lower and more affordable housing, I think bringing our jobs housing balance into our larger discussion around projects could sort of ground us in the data of how number of homes produced relates to affordability. I just wanted to know if other folks had thoughts about that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And staff, particularly Director Bryant, anything you can add to that or any insight?
I will say that actually I realized after the agenda packet went out that the general plan does have a discussion about this issue. And I probably should have included a link to that. If it's okay with you, I'll just share my screen and show you
Always
what that shows. Hang on a sec, let me bring it up first. I have yet, after all these years, to figure out exactly how to make screen sharing work in Zoom. But, okay, there we go. Can you all see that?
Yep.
So this is on page what? I'm not sure what the page number is, but anyway, this is in the land use section of the general plan. And it has this brief discussion about job housing balance. This scale over here starts at 0, goes up to 4.5. So 1.0 represents a city that has the same number of housing units as it has. It's actually employed residents ratio, I guess, compared to number of housing units. Anyway, so if you're below the line, you have more housing than jobs. And if you're above the line, you have more jobs than housing. As you can see, Emeryville, as Commissioner Simon says, is way above the line. It's up around the 4.0 range, almost. Other cities are more balanced. I think one thing to consider is that Emeryville is very small. And so it's really a microcosm of a bigger Bay Area. If you look at Piedmont, its ratio is kind of the inverse of Emeryville. They're below 0.5. So in other words, they have less than 0.5 jobs for every housing unit in Piedmont because it's primarily a bedroom community. Albany is similar. Berkeley has more. Berkeley and Oakland have more jobs than housing, but only slightly more. Now, what the different colored bars represent is what the situation was in 1995 and what it was in 2005. The general plan was adopted in 2009, and this is what is projected in 2030. And this is based on the general plan's projections of housing units and jobs by 2030. So what the general plan is saying is that if the forecast that's in the general plan comes true, then the job housing balance will be reduced. It won't be reduced to 1.0, but it will be reduced significantly from what it was in 2005. So in other words, under the scenario of the general plan, we will be producing more housing than jobs. We'll be producing both, but we'll be producing housing at a higher rate, faster rate than we're producing jobs. So the job housing balance will come down. So that in a nutshell is what the general plan says about job housing.
That's very good.
I will stop sharing now. I can figure out how to do it.
Down at the bottom, there should be or the top, there should be your stop share.
Yeah, I know. Okay, there we go. I think I did it.
You did. It looks good. Okay. So I have a question primarily for Commissioner Simons, but I would like to hear from anyone else on the commission if they have any thoughts or questions. Okay, so Henry, I agree with you. I think that this is an issue. I think I'd like to know really where we are, since we're only 8 years away from that projection. I'd like to know how close we are to that. Are we heading down or are we heading up? But I think my question for you more so would be, if this information were provided to us, this isn't something that we can base a decision on. We can't use this to approve or deny a project necessarily. But what do you see as the benefit or the way we would use this information in this tool? You're on mute still.
Thanks, Chair Keller. So it's kind of like, so think about the debt clock, right? Like there's some debt clock out there. I think it's in New York City, right? It's like, there's some folks, they're probably conservatives who want to like cut Social Security, Medicare for old people. And they think a great way to do that is to like have a debt clock that's constantly running up. So we can orient ourselves around this like nebulous debt number, and cut taxes for businesses and cut Social Security for old people, like whatever it is. So I think, and they found this really great number to, insert into the conversation. I'm very interested in affordability, livability, biking, walking, transit, all these benefits that I know I think various members of the commission are really committed to. And I think our jobs housing balance just kind of really gets to like all of them. I think if we make our jobs housing balance better, more balanced, everything else will get better too. So, maybe we get a report every 6 months. Hey, how did we do? Or every month or after every project. I just think it grounds us in like the facts and the data rather than just thinking about projects one at a time. We get a big picture idea of like how we're doing in terms of making our city more livable. So I think that's why having it presented every time would be, it's like you go to a doctor and they like, look up your blood pressure or whatever. It's like, how did I do in the last 6 months? How did I eat? And so I think that's just like a nice way of getting to that. And if people have other ideas for other basic numbers, we could all think about it. I'd love to hear that. But I think jobs, housing, balance is just like a really nice, simple one to ground us in our goals.
No, I think it's important to know to have that. I think to do it for every project or every month would be an incredible burden on staff. I think for them to run those numbers would be really hard. I think if we were to ask for those numbers quarterly, would probably be the most I would want to ask of staff. But I think Director Bryan has something to add to it.
Yes, I do. Thank you, Chair Keller. I agree with you, Chair Keller, that this metric is not something that you would base a decision on a project on. It would be interesting data to have. I would draw an analogy to the RHNA, the Regional Housing Need Allocation, where we always want to be measuring how we're doing in terms of meeting our RHNA goals. But we don't report that with every project. But we do report it every year in our general plan annual report that the Planning Commission reviews in February and the Council reviews in March and is due to the state by April 1st. And given that this metric is in the general plan, as I just showed you, we have not traditionally included the job housing balance, the current figure, in our general plan annual report. We certainly could do that. And that would be a way of getting an annual snapshot to see where we are on the job housing balance.
I think as a place to start, and I don't know if it's something you could do or if you would like the commission to hold a meeting, discuss it, and ask, take an action item and a vote to ask you to do that. But I think to start and to really see if it's a useful tool to have you report on it annually. Because like I said, looking at that chart, I don't think we're meeting that goal of getting that low on the job housing balance by 2030. I mean, that's 8 years from now. And compared to the housing we're building and what's on the boards for approval for research and development alone, I don't know, I think that it's going to get higher. So I think maybe having an annual picture of that would help the commission at least get a picture of, because we do look at the housing element every year. We do look at the RENA numbers, and that's all on housing, but we never know how that relates to how many jobs are we producing in the area. Because to me, creating jobs creates more traffic than housing does. And I think that has a bigger impact on our overall value, quality of life, our health, and everything else. So I think just knowing that would be beneficial, but I don't know if that's something you could add on, or if you would like the commission to make a vote on asking you to produce that, or what you'd like to do from this point.
Well, as I said at the beginning of the meeting, no actions are to be taken at tonight's meeting. So if you were to vote on this, it would have to be agendized for a future meeting.
Yeah.
I don't really think we need a commission vote to include this in our general plan annual report. I mean, it is part of the general plan, so we can certainly do that.
Okay. And Commissioner Simons, does that meet with your approval for a start?
That sounds like a great place to start. Yeah.
Okay, very good. Well, that went a lot faster than I thought. Oh, Commissioner Dram.
So what I see here is like developers are not interested to do any residential projects in Emeryville. I think it's good to brainstorm together to see how we can make it more interesting to them to start doing more residentials other than commercials. Thank you.
I think that's the crux of the situation right now, particularly getting the reports we had on the last projects, that it's just not viable. And I don't know how we make it more viable, but that is certainly something. I think our next subject we're going to talk about in incentivizing home ownership, but I think maybe incentivizing home building could be something else we could talk about. And I think it's a problem that we're all aware of throughout the, really it's throughout the world. I mean, I do a lot of looking at what's going on in London, and housing everywhere is a real problem, but yeah. So let's close out this item of jobs housing unless someone else would like to make a comment or ask a question. And if not, we'll move on to the idea of incentivizing home ownership. And at this time, I will open it up to public comment. Anyone wishing to address the commission on the subject of incentivizing home ownership, please step forward by either raising your hand, or Charlie can tell us if we have any speaker cards on the subject.
I do not have any online speaker cards, and I do not see any raised hands among the attendees for this topic.
Okay, we will close the public comment period, and we'll bring it back and ask about ways to encourage home ownership. And was that something somebody put on the agenda, a request?
I seem to recall it was Commissioner Chafe, but I could be wrong.
I was afraid you were going to say that.
I'm going to support you on this because I believe it's something we should work on too. So we'll work together.
Yeah, definitely. So again, I don't really have much, prepared to say on this. I just think that, home ownership is something that is desired by many people. It leads to stability, especially for families that are looking to find a place for children to grow up. So it's closely linked to quality of schools. And as I think we've discussed many times, many of the projects that come before us are intending to build residential that will be rented, not sold. And so the opportunities for home ownership in Emeryville are relatively little at this point. And I think that I've been hearing from other commissioners that this is something we'd like to change. And I certainly don't have answers. I just would like to see the situation change. So that's, I think, why I wanted to bring it up and see if there were thoughts among the commissioners about, places where they've seen this happening more successfully, anything that we can do in the Planning Commission to influence this, whether it's something that we want to bring towards the City Council. I'll just leave it there for now.
Very good. I agree with that. But before I speak, I want to see if there's anyone else that has any thoughts, questions, beliefs. Commissioner Gitsoni.
Yeah, this is something that's concerned me a lot too, because I think that having a more permanent population will improve the quality of the community here. And it's good to have renters, but it's good to have more of a balance. So there's a lot of benefits to improving that. I guess my thing is more of a question is I do see that developers frequently really have a strong preference for building rental property as opposed to for sale property, for sale residence. And I don't really understand the dynamic of that, but I think that if we have a stronger understanding of why the one thing has more appeal than the other, that might help us understand how we could craft things that would push things in the direction we might want them to go.
Very good. And Commissioner Dram, was there something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I think we've seen some projects through the city that it brings both options, like a couple of floors only for sale, a couple of floors for rental. I think mixing that option gives people more option to choose, because not everybody have the luxury to buy a house. Some people have to rent the apartment. So, and I think mixing condo and apartment would be a really good option. And that's something that can happen through planning, the rules that we put in the planning portion.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Okay. And there's a question I have for Director Bryant. First, I agree with what's been said, particularly with Commissioner Chief. I really agree that if we had owners, more owners in the city, our schools would be better, because we would have people who are going to stay here and want to see their schools good for their children. I think now so many people here, the children get of school age and they move out. So I think not only does it have larger community benefits just in general, but I think it could have a great direct correlation to our schools in general. It's also one of the only ways in America that we build well is through property. And if people can't get in that door, they never get the opportunity to build any sort of wealth or nesting. So I think that's one of the problems that we have. And I think it also, as Commissioner Gitzoni says, we would have a much more engaged community. We have people who are invested in the community financially, not just emotionally and thinking about their future, but they actually have a financial stake in the community. So I think there's so many things that drive this. On the flip side, and I'm going to ask Director Bryant to elaborate on this, but it's something that in my own building, you know, I live in a building that has over 500 units. A lot of them, even though we are a condo, and I think it's the same thing in Watergate, you know, these are very large housing units that have a lot of renters in it. So the city has a very hard time. We don't have the legal ability to make people not rent the property that they own. So that's one side of the coin that's very hard for us to control as a city. And then Charlie, there's the other part, and I want you to elaborate on this if my understanding is correct or not, but when a developer builds a condominium project, they're kind of on the hook for any defects, construction defects for 10 years, which then makes it very unattractive to them to hold a property for 10 years and have to take care of leaky windows, leaky roofs, leaky walls, and things like that. So I think the state has built-in disincentives for people to want to build for sale housing. So can you elaborate on any of those items, Charlie?
I believe that's true, what you just said. I'm not that familiar with it. I do want to note that when we were developing the regulations for multi-unit housing several years ago, which are in Article 20, I believe, of Chapter 5 of the planning regulations, there is a provision in there, which I did include in your packet, that requires the developers to record a condo map. So if they are getting bonus points, and most projects do seek bonus points. So if a project seeks a development bonus, and I think if it's 10 units or more, they must record a condo map. However, they are not required to sell the individual condo units. The city attorney at the time advised us that that was as far as we could legally go in terms of mandating ownership housing. So they can be made condo units, and they have to be under our regulations, but the developer can retain ownership of the units and operate it as a rental project if they elect to do so.
And not only can they retain it, they can sell, the developer could sell the whole property to someone else who could then do the same.
Yes.
Right,
yes.
okay.
I do want to also elaborate on what you mentioned about ownership units being rented out. it's pretty much common knowledge that the population of Emeryville is about 2/3 renters and 1/3 owners. However, what is not so well known is that if you look at the assessor's data, you find out that about 2/3 of the dwelling units in Emeryville are actually condos. So it seems like it seems like an oxymoron that you have 2/3 of the units are condos, but 2/3 of the population are renters. That's because about half or more of those condo units are rented out. So if you look at Watergate, for example, which is about 1,250 condominium units, the rental population out there, I think, is about 40% of those units are rented, even though they're condos. So as Chair Keller says, we can't really legislate property owners' behavior, and we can't, legally, I don't think we can prevent them from renting their units out to somebody who doesn't own the unit. So it's a real head scratcher to try to figure out how to incentivize people to not only own units, but also live in those units that they own.
So two things to that, and I believe you're totally right on that. And I believe one thing is that if you only build for rent places, that's all you're going to get is renters. If you build condos, even if only half those people that own it live there, you still have 50% owners in a place where you would have had 100% renters. So I understand what you're saying, but I believe if we're not building condos that people can own, we're never going to get owners.
And that's the rationale for our regulation that requires condos.
Yeah, and it's like I say, it's a condo map, but it certainly doesn't require anybody to do that. So I think to move forward on this thing, it's if someone had this put on the agenda, please speak up if you want to go on to it. But I think I think the second item, adding a community benefit category for development bonus system, would be probably the only tool I can see that we can use to encourage these developers to make for sale units. Now the market is going to demand, if a developer can make more money renting a place than selling it, they're definitely going to always do that. And I don't know that there's anything in state regulations that would allow us to do anything different. But I think if someone is having a hard time getting their bonus points, and you say, hey, you got 50% need to be affordable housing, you can get your other 50% by making these for sale. Then they don't have to worry about any other, coming up with any other community benefits to get the points they need. And I think, to me, that seems to be the only carrot that we have to offer, is to say, make these for sale units and you can make all your bonus points that way.
I think, if I may, Chair Keller?
Yes, please.
We already have that requirement of a condo map for new multifamily housing. So in order to make this bonus point item really have teeth, I think that there'd have to be some provision that you have to record a deed restriction or something that would mandate owner occupancy of the unit.
Well, I'm not saying that's the owner occupancy. I'm saying that the developer, they have a condo map, but they decide to choose rent them out. I'm saying we give you 50 bonus points if you sell the units, not retain them.
And what happens if they sell the unit and then the person who buys it rents it out?
That's what I'm saying. You can't, I don't think there's any real way that you can control that. But I'm saying if you have 100 units that are all for sale, 100 people are not going to buy it and then turn around and rent it. You're going to get 50 people that actually live there. And that's 50% more, or 50 more people that live in Emeryville, that are buying in Emeryville, that have a chance to build wealth, that have a way to start, home ownership. So I'm saying that to me, it's the only carrot that I know we can offer. Say, okay, Mr. Developer, you get 50 bonus points for giving us affordable housing. You need 50 more bonus points. Put these things up for sale. When you finish the project, put them on the market, and you get your other 50 points. So that, to me, is the only thing I can see that we can, and it wouldn't even be a mandate, it's just offering an incentive. And that's the way I think that we can incentivize home ownership, is by doing that. Unless, I don't know of anyone here that can pull a rabbit out of their hat. Okay, anything else? And then we have the below market rate opportunities for home ownership. And was that Commissioner Cheap also?
I can take that quickly. I mean, I think we've had a lot of projects come before us recently that have some proportion of affordable or below market rate housing. Again, I think it's very much related to what we just talked about. Most of them are rental units and they're not for sale. And so, I'd really like to take some time to think about how we can encourage more opportunities for below market rate home ownership. Just curious if others have thoughts on that.
I did, and I think Charlie wants to speak on that, but Charlie, we did that at 1500 Park Avenue. I have a coworker who just bought a below market rate at 1500 Park Avenue. So it's something the city has done in the past. Is there anything preventing us from that other than developer lack of interest?
No, not at all. I mean, we have BMR requirements for condo projects as well as for rental projects. What experience over the years has shown is that people at very low incomes, low or very low income, struggle with home ownership, largely because they have difficulty meeting the homeowners association dues and other reasons. So you have a pretty high rate of failure among lower income people in the homeownership category, but moderate income seems to be more successful. So our BMR criteria are different for ownership than they are for rental. And if you look at the bonus point system in the planning regulations, you'll see the same thing. For ownership BMRs, the percentage is all moderate income, and for rental, it's moderate, low, and very low income. But we do have some condo developments in Emeryville that have BMR units in them.
I kind of thought so, and I think what I agree with Commissioner Chape is if there's a way to incentivize more of those, maybe the city uses some of its affordable money to help the developer with the financing of those units. We'll look at ways of doing that. To me, I think the biggest thing is getting developers to sell units, and then that would be an iterative step. Is okay, you're going to sell these units now. Can you make 5% of those below market rate, and maybe it's just for moderate? Because I think also the problem with ultra low people is they don't have the money for the down payment as well. So it gets very, very hard. But I think even if we're helping somebody get a leg up who really wouldn't be able to otherwise, I think we're better off at least, or taking a step in the right direction.
And the city does have, I provided links to this in the staff report. The city does have a couple of home ownership programs, both for BMRs specifically, and also for market rate through the first time home buyer program.
Very good. Okay, if that's all we have on that subject, I certainly don't want to rush out. If people have more thoughts or questions, go ahead, Commissioner Chape.
Yeah, thanks. This is all really interesting. I mean, I think I'd be interested in pursuing this a little bit more and just thinking about how we can actually make this action oriented in the future. What is it that we could potentially do to help incentivize developers to offer more of these rather than just, it sounds like basically all the frameworks are there, all of the pieces are there, and we're just not seeing developers come and propose these units. And so if there's anything we can do to change in maybe a minor way the structure of incentives that we have right now, so we see more of these being built into future developments, I would be very much in favor of that.
So is that something you think you'd like to put on a future agenda item, that you talk about that and then maybe make a motion to find ways to incentivize or push forward to council ideas of incentivizing?
Yeah, I think that would be great. And I definitely don't, purport to have any of the answers to this, but I think if anybody else has ideas and sees value in further discussing it, then yeah, I'd be very happy to have it as a future agenda item.
Okay, great. And Commissioner Simons?
Thanks, Chair Keller. Just like one very brief thought on something we might want to consider around this is, as someone who constantly scrolls the real estate apps, I see these complexes that have, 4 to 6 units. You knock down a single family home and replace it with 4 townhouses down the side with a driveway. Those seem like those usually get sold rather than rented out. So maybe we just need to think creatively about how we incentivize the sort of missing middle housing, which often seems to get sold rather than rented out. I don't know, when you bike around Oakland, just take a look and see what you bike by, see if there's a for sale or a for rent sign. It seems like that sweet spot there seems like what actually gets sold as condos. So that may be something for us to consider as well.
It is, I agree with that. And the surprising thing is we have seen several projects come to us. There was one, I think, prior to most of you being out here, but on Doyle Street, there was the Doyle Muse or something that there was going to be 6 units that were all going to be for sale. And there was a young lady on Ocean, I believe, was going to do a 4-plex, then she changed it to a triplex. And those have never come to fruition. And then we've twice done, on 54th near the Pickleworks, that duplex that the family was going to do, and then they sold it. Now another developers come and we've approved that, but it just seems that they don't move beyond the approval process. And I wonder what's happening with those, because I think, as Commissioner Simon says, those are perfect opportunities to do small units, small projects, especially if they're under 10, they don't have to do a lot of the requirements that we have for units that are 10 or above, but they seem to die on the vine. Is there any insight you have to what's happening there, Charlie? Like your crystal ball or?
Well, I guess I would just say that it's kind of a syndrome of smaller developers as opposed to the bigger ones. The bigger developers like your Avalon Bay and your Lennar or whoever, these are large companies that do this as that's their business. And they have lots of people who've been doing that kind of thing for years, and they know how to do it, and they know how the system works, and they know how to get projects approved and built and operated. The smaller projects tend to kind of be one-offs. Usually, it's often a small, not a small business owner or an individual person or a very small firm that doesn't have a lot of experience and may not be totally familiar with how to develop and build and operate residential projects. I know for all of the ones you have cited, it certainly is the case that they are smaller companies that often just don't have the wherewithal to get things approved and if they are approved, to ultimately get them built and operated.
Yeah, I think that's, and I'll call on you in just a minute, Navar, but most of these developments, have been like the young lady that had the property on Ocean. She was just a single owner that owned this property and wanted to develop it. And I don't know if when she got approval, if she just realized the, income to cost ratio wasn't there or what has happened, but it just seems like, I think these are really great projects. We approved them all, they paid to have architects plan these whole things. And then they just kind of evaporate. And I don't know if there's something that the city can do to reduce fees for these kind of things to help them move along, especially, and maybe that's something else we could look at to incentivize these homeownership things, is maybe reduce some fees, on some of these items, especially for smaller unit projects. So that might be something else the commission wants to have as part of their discussion. Can we, the city, help incentivize these builders to do things? Navar, did you want to make a comment? I see you put your hand down.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in that the project you're referring to on Ocean is coming to fruition. It's just been a long time in the works. They had some hurdles, so that is in the building permit phase. And Doyle Street Muse project you referenced, that project sold after approval, and then the new buyer didn't find it to be financially viable. So there's different cases.
Yeah, kind of what we thought. Yeah, okay, well, it's good to know, but I hope we can get some of these built. Okay, so that will close out the home ownership unless there's anyone on the commission who would like to add to that. And before we move on, I'd like to see if there's a raise of hands that people would like to take a break. Or we want to take a break? Okay, 2 people, let's take a break. Let's come back at, say, 8:30. Okay, we'll adjourn until 8:30. Thank you. before we proceed, we want to make sure we have a quorum and our legal counsel with us as well. All righty. I don't see Commissioner Dram or Commissioner Chief back yet. We do have a quorum, but I do want to give them a minute or two. We'll give him till 8:32 and move on. While we're waiting for him, I'm going to call the meeting back into order so I can just ask Director Bryant how he thinks we're doing. Are we on track, staying on track, staying out of trouble, doing what we're supposed to do?
Well, if you
me in particular,
if you were getting in trouble, Christy or I would have spoken up.
This is true.
So I think you're doing fine. You're sticking to the topics that are listed on the agenda, okay, which is what we had hoped for and anticipated. So I think that's
and ideas that we can move forward on eventually. That would probably just have to come in another meeting, or would it be at this meeting that perhaps we would ask anything to be agendized?
If you have something specific, some specific action that you can articulate that you would like for the commission to take an action on at a future meeting, you could ask for that to be agendized. Okay. Otherwise, I think this is just a very thoughtful discussion that will inform future projects and deliberations on a variety of topics.
Okay, very good. So seeing everyone back now, we will move forward with the agenda item 5.4, Parks and Open Space. I'd like to open the meeting up to public comment. Anyone wishing to address the commission on the subject of parks and open space, now is your time, and you would have 3 minutes to address the commission. And I guess you have a speaker card. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to speak first?
I do not see any raised hands among the attendees, and I have no further online speaker cards other than the one that I have.
Okay, we'll let you go ahead and read that to us.
All right, and I will time this for 3 minutes. This is, oops, sorry, my clock just went off. Try that again, okay. This is from Brian Donahue, 4333 Holden Street. Mr. Donahue says, warning, the Planning Commission is about to be deceived. For years now, I've been telling City Hall about the true status of parks in our town, but they don't want to hear it because the truth makes them look bad. I've been telling them to stop using deceit when they total up the acreage of parks they have built, especially when they make public presentations about our parks. City officials are constantly touting what a great job they're doing as a general thing with the parks in Emeryville specifically. There's a great need to bump up the number of acres of parkland because Emeryville is far, far behind our general plan guidelines, and because our town is the worst town in the entire Bay Area for parks. So city council members and staff have a natural tendency to want to increase the embarrassing numbers. Over the years, I've noticed they will call linear parks, glorified sidewalks, parks in order to make it look better than it is in Emeryville. Two such parks, in quotes, are the Emeryville Greenway and the Bay Trail. It's very tempting for these government officials to call these things parks because they would add quite a bit of acreage to the total if they were included. But the general plan says linear parks, and specifically the Bay Trail and the Greenway, are not to be considered parks for the counting of acreage in the city. See table 4-1 on page 4-4 in the plan. It can't be any more clear than that. This week, the staff is making a presentation to the Planning Commission wherein they are informing the commissioners that these linear parks are to be considered to be included in the total park acreage that the city has built. This is false. The Planning Commission should not be fooled. It would be great if we had a city staff and city council that would brook in the truth
with regards to our parks and the terrible lack of them here. But unfortunately, we don't have that kind of government. We want the parks we're supposed to get as outlined in our general plan, period. Here's to a different kind of Emeryville City Hall than the one we have, one that is transparent, accountable, and tells the truth. And that concludes Mr. Donahue's comment.
Thank you very much. And no other presentations come up during that time?
Well, still no raised hands among the attendees. Let me just take a final check of my email. No further online speaker cards.
Very good. We will close the public comment period of this and bring it back to the commission, and we will start with our POPOS versus common open space. And whose item was this?
I believe this was Commissioner Chafe.
Okay.
Me again. So yeah, I think the issue here and the reason that I brought it up is because we've had several projects come up in the past year or two where there are POPOs proposed that potentially have privacy issues or like security issues, especially in buildings that tend to house specific types of industry. And so basically, a couple issues here. One is that sometimes there's open space that's not accessible to the general public. Sometimes there's a POPOs proposed, and then sometimes there's like other outdoor space, right? And so I think what I've been hearing is that we're often critical, or maybe critical is not the right word. We're wishing that projects that proposed open space for the residents were able to make that available to the general public as well. And it's potentially space that could add to our park space in the city or common space in general, but it's not able to be. So that's one issue. And then I think the other one is just the balance between the open space that qualifies within a project that sits within a building versus space that's outside. So that's just to kind of frame it. If others have a different understanding or any other issues to add to this topic, please feel free to raise those.
Alrighty, very good. So I think what I am hearing probably is one of your most biggest points is the fact of having outdoor space for exclusive use, and wondering if there's ways that we can get some of that space opened up to be more public. Would that be a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think so, yeah. And I mean, maybe to go as far as to say that, in some cases, I think some of the most desirable spaces within the building are kept just for employees and are not open to the public.
Uh-huh. Okay. And Charlie, basically, if a project chooses to have that kind of open space, as long as they're providing the required space, whether a project's required to have public open space or just shared space along, for the building occupants, is there anything we as a commission can do to influence or change that?
I don't know that we can impose any kind of a requirement to open up common open space to the public. I will note that the POPOS requirement, privately owned public open space, is exactly what it says, public open space, and that is required to be open to the public. However, that is a relatively new requirement. It's new since our overhaul of our planning regulations that took effect in 2013. So it's been a little less than 10 years. I can't recall any major development projects that have been approved since that time, commercial, and it only applies to commercial projects. The POPOS is only for commercial projects.
Okay.
I can't recall any major commercial projects that have been approved and built since the new planning regulations were adopted that actually has a POPOS requirement. So I'm not sure we have real world experience. It takes a number of years before these things actually become reality. And I see Miru nodding her head, and of course she's the one who would have processed any such projects. We have several, as you know, in the works right now that will have a POPOS requirement, but they haven't been built yet.
Okay.
So we do have a number of projects that have sort of voluntarily opened up their open space to the public. Specifically, a couple of the Emory Station projects have done that, and also the Chiron campus has that, or had that, and the BMR, Emeryville Center of Innovation, will also have some privately owned public open space that they are voluntarily opening up to the public. Now that, of course, it's a new project, but it's being approved under a 1995 PUD, so it does not have a POPOS requirement.
So let's expand a little bit on those that existing, specifically those three that you mentioned. Are those seen as community benefits to where they have to be open for public use 24/7, or can the developer or property owner decide what they want to do with that?
I'm sorry, which projects are you referring to?
You would refer to the two at the Warren property and the one at the
BMR.
Yeah, the BMR, the one that exists, the park down the corner.
Yeah, I mean, maybe Miru can help me out here. The Emory Station East, which has the elevated open space that you can get to from either Pelledew or Horton or Hollis Street, I don't know that there's a requirement that it be open to the public 24/7, but it is. The Emory Station West actually has the grand staircase and then the open space that leads to the pet bike bridge over the railroad. And I can't recall off the top of my head if we had a requirement that it be open to the public 24/7. I know that certainly was the intent, and perhaps there's a condition of approval that says that. I'm not sure about the BMR Center of Innovation, if we have a condition that requires that open space to be open to the public. Do you recall, Miru, on any of those?
Yeah, so for the Emory Station East, there is a condition of approval that requires that space to be open to the public, not 24/7, but during expanded business hours. And Emory Station West, well, that's open to the public 24/7 because it's on the way to the bridge connection. And Biomed, I don't recall. I'll need to check.
I can't see that being closed because it's ground level and there's really nothing that connects to a building like the other two. So I can't imagine why they would want to close that, and it would be kind of difficult. They'd have to fence it off. So I think that's probably a little more open. Thank you, Maru. So in considering these POPOs, I don't know if Commissioner Chapin is what it is, but I'm wondering this, is if we're going to start approving more of these and considering them part of the community realm, is it something that we should strive towards, working towards, to make sure that we require that there is a conditional use, that they do stay open 24/7, so they are truly public open space and usable?
Well, the planning regulations require that for the POPOs that are required now in new development projects. They must be open to the public. I'm not sure if it's 24/7, but they must be open to the public. I will note that I believe it's 5% of the gross floor area of the building must be common open space, and of which 1% must be POPOs, if I have that right. Yeah, Mira's nodding, so yeah. So if you have a 300,000 square foot building, for example, 5% of that is what? 15,000 square feet? Is that right? Yeah, and
let's just say it is.
1% would be 3,000 square feet. So you have to have 15,000 square feet of common open space, including 3,000 square feet of POPOs. So 12,000 square feet of common open space, 3,000 square feet of POPOs.
And common open space can be restricted to tenants only.
Yes, it can. However, I would note that they can, if they wish to, they can provide more POPOs than that.
Right.
It's just that a minimum of 1% has to be POPOs.
Okay, so if they exceed the minimum and they decide that other than 3,000 square foot, they're going to give us 6,000 square foot of POPOs, and it's approved and goes forward, can they later go back and take back 3,000 square feet and make it non-public open space?
I think that kind of depends on how the approval is written.
Okay, so that's something we want to be mindful of as a commission.
Yeah, I mean, typically in the conditions of approval of a project, we will say how many square feet the building is and how many square feet of open space it has and all that kind of thing. If we wanted to make sure that whatever, say this, by your example, say 2% instead of 1% was POPOS, as proposed by the developer, we would want to make sure we memorialize that in the conditions of approval.
Okay, that was kind of the point I was making, is that we want to make sure that if they're offering us more, which to me, the intent of that is to make the project more appealing to us to approve, then we need to make sure that that carries forward in perpetuity, not just until the project's built and a year later they decide they're going to take it back.
Right.
Okay. Very good. Anything else on this from the commission?
I'll just add one more thing. On the Parks Committee, sorry if I've mentioned this before, but we've found that a big issue with POPOs is that people don't know they exist and that they're not marked. And so we've talked about doing better wayfinding. And again, this may not necessarily fall under the Planning Commission, but perhaps it could through conditions of approval, just the POPOs be marked from the outside. So I think one thing might be on the city, which is to create directories and bring together all the POPOs in some way, through signage, like wayfinding. But I think, the projects could certainly do a much better job. I'll cite one specific project that exists, which is the one on Hollis, just south of 59th. It's like a garden on the second floor. There would be no way of knowing that that was publicly accessible unless you were in the know already. So
Charlie, is that something that we could do as a condition of approval, is ask that the developer put wayfinding signs and notices that there is a public open space? Because I've seen it in San Francisco, several places. A very prominent sign saying this is public open, and it may post some hours when it's open, but it's very clear that that space is usable by the public. So I would see that we could do a conditional use permit when we approve that, right?
I would think we could include a condition like that, assuming that the developer didn't object to it.
Right. Okay, and Maru, were you wanting to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight another type of open space that is different from common open space and private open space, and that's the open space for community benefits. And this for community benefits can be indoors or outdoors. We do not have in our regulations any parameters as to where a developer can choose to provide the additional public open space as part of community benefits for which they are seeking bonus points. I just wanted to highlight that. That's all.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And I think that's kind of what the second item alludes to, is the creating guidelines for indoor open space. I think that might segue into that. If there's no other comment on the first item, we can kind of move into that. And I don't know who brought that up.
Sure, Keller, I just have one.
Oh, sure, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Commissioner Chape, I wonder if you could, I don't really know how to think about POPOs in this city. Like, I'm not great about visiting them. I can't tell if we're doing a good, are we creating ones that aren't that great and we need to create better ones, or are we creating them and people don't know about them? If I'm thinking about POPOs, what's our big challenge as an expert in this topic?
Well, Commissioner Gazzoni can weigh in as well as another member of the Parks Committee, but I think that we have some good ones. And I think it's the accessibility in terms of signage and just like public awareness. So Commissioner Gazzoni, what do you say about it?
I would second you on that. I think signage and awareness are the big problem. There are nice spaces, they're just, most people have no idea they're there to take advantage of, so they don't.
So what is the other one?
Let's go visit.
What is the other one that you had mentioned, Commissioner Chape, on 59th and Hollis? That has
I'm sure there's somebody here who knows the official name.
I believe that's Emery Station East, that you're referring to.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, is there one I don't know about? So it's the green building on the corner neck behind Chevron?
Yeah, the one with the fountain out front.
Yeah, on Hollis Street.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, yeah. I was gonna say, is there a Publix I don't know about? Okay, very good. So that brings us to the guidelines for indoor open space. And is that also you, Commissioner Chen? Or did someone else?
Actually, Commissioner Dram mentioned that.
Oh, okay.
And I would note that there is I think I included it in your packet, in the section of the Emeryville Design Guidelines on open space, there is a guideline about indoor open space.
Okay. So Commissioner Dram, can you give us your sense of feelings or what you wanted to try to talk about tonight?
Yes, of course. So we have many projects that after getting the bonuses, there's no hard limit on the project and they're throughout the Emeryville. And I was like thinking that, is it any way that we can limit that or think about it or be relaxed about it so the developer can build any height they want anywhere when it's a mixed use or the zoning is matching for that construction? That was my only concern here.
Okay.
Because on the general plan, it's very talking generally and saying like we need to step down, but I don't see what we are approving on the projects, and we're talking on the projects. And maybe it's okay, we should be relaxed about it and don't think about it, or maybe we can come up with something, you know?
Mm-hmm. Okay. So does the commission feel that, you know, I can't really think of, I know of indoor space at, in San Francisco at LinkedIn, you know, has a really nice public open space, a big lobby that they open up with really big doors, and there's a coffee place inside. Do we have any indoor space like that currently in Emeryville? That's pretty much open? No.
None that I'm aware of.
Okay.
I mean, there's actually in Minneapolis that has a much different climate than we do here. There is actually a city park that is inside a building, in the lobby of a building. I forget what it's called, but I visited it. It's quite interesting. It's got trees and grass and all kinds of things inside a building lobby.
Wow. So would the commissioner say that we need more guidelines and more information on criteria on how to set up an open space? Or Charlie, is it possible to share that part of the general plan that you were talking about?
Oh, sure.
Maybe that will give us a sense of what's here and if there's anything missing.
What happened? I thought I had it. Oh, here it is. Let's see.
No rush, we're doing good on time.
Okay, let me open and share my screen. So here it is. Can you see this?
Coming up, yeah. Okay.
So actually, this is the whole section on open space that's in the Emeryville Design Guidelines. So it's got a section on private open space with 6 guidelines, then then a section on common open space with another 11 guidelines.
But now let's go back.
And
Common open
publicly
space can be restricted. Common open space can be just for tenants, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And then publicly accessible open space. I mean, that common open space is as differentiated from publicly accessible, meaning that common open space is not necessarily publicly accessible. So there's another, about 9 guidelines here. And the last one, G26, addresses the indoor issue. It says indoor publicly accessible open spaces are permitted, but should be exceptionally well designed. They should be adjacent to and visible from streets, have tall ceilings and glazing to allow natural light, provide public art displays and seating, and be free of private logos, signs, or markings.
Interesting.
So that's, that's the extent of what it says about it. It's pretty broad, but it does allow it.
So does anyone see anything there that is lacking that you would possibly, again, since we are not here, cannot make recommendations or findings? Is there anything that we would want to agendize as a meeting to explore deeper and maybe solidify? Is there anything anyone can think of? Vice Chair Mendez.
Yeah, maybe if we do have any spaces like this, it'd be a good idea to include it as in the wayfinding. If we have some kind of city map that identifies these places along with the popos, I think that they're kind of in the same category.
Yeah, I kind of see it that way too.
I think this would be along the lines of what Miru was talking about, where somebody would be requesting development bonus points for additional private open space, and it could therefore be inside. I think the impetus for this, I believe, and Commissioner Dram can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the impetus for this was the proposal, the former proposal for the 5801 Christie project, that they were proposing to put a portion of the open space in the lobby of the Life Science Tower.
Correct.
And as you know, that project has been completely redesigned and will be coming back to the commission for a study session in the future. So I don't know if it'll have that feature in the future, but they did have it in the previous iteration.
And does the commission feel that we need more guidelines, more criteria, or anything? Should a project like that come back to us, or do you think what is already in the general plan is enough that would allow us to guide the developer into what we'd like to see?
In the design guidelines, you mean?
Yeah. To me, I think it's broad enough that we could, pretty much make requests of what they would provide, especially if they're asking for bonus points. But I don't know how the rest of the commission feels.
I think it gives you a lot of latitude to determine if it's appropriate or not.
Right. How do the park committee people feel? Commissioner Gitzoni, do you feel that what we saw in the guidelines is adequate, should be broadened, narrowed?
I think that it's very broad. There's a lot of room and there's a lot of latitude inside of it. I would think that maybe a basic principle would be something to guide it, and that would be how well does this serve the needs of the community, and particularly, is this a space that people in the community will gather? Is this a space that people in the community will feel comfortable sitting in, spending time in? What is the value of it to the community? I think that's worth asking. I see some popos in downtown San Francisco, one which is the part of a large lobby, and should you go in there, you really just feel like you're intruding in a lobby and you're watching workers go by. And I feel like that particular building is getting credit for really not having provided anything. But if it's something like a seating area where people might stop and chat for a little bit with some friends, or stop and read a book, or just rest their heels, that's different. So I think the value, it's probably just coming down to the basic principle of like what function was performed.
Right. And do you think that would be a judgment made a case by case by the commission, whether they feel that, especially if someone's looking for bonus points, but I think it also needs to be, if they're counting it as part of a POPOS, that the commission make that determination, like, people are going to ignore this, people are not going to feel welcome there, and you need to make changes to that. But do you think that we need to change anything in the design guidelines to that, or would it be done on a case by case basis, more or less the commission's responsibility to make sure that it meets those goals that you're talking about?
I think it's so open-ended that I think you really kind of have to look at it on a case-by-case basis and just really kind of evaluate, for this project in this neighborhood, do I see that space having real value to the community?
That's kind of the way
that's really the basic principle is value. Does this have value to the community?
Right.
But that will always change depending on where it's located.
Yeah, that's kind of the way I saw it. And how about you, Commissioner Chade?
No, I agree completely. And I think, the point that Commissioner Gizzoni made about people feeling welcome is really the key one. If you think about the people who use the park, are they going to feel welcome in this space as well?
Yeah.
So, I think with that consideration, I'm happy with it.
Okay. Yeah, and I really think it's important to do on a case-by-case basis, because I think some space, if it opens right up to a park or something that is obviously open to the public, and it had big enough doors, and especially if there's a coffee place inside or something that really attracted people, I think that could be an amenity. But I think if it's off of the side of something and it's not connected to a park or something, and you're kind of claiming that as, this is open to the public and people are going to feel like intruders, that's not going to feel right. So I think it has to be kind of on a case-by-case basis. And I think we as a commission are intelligent enough to really see what's going to feel for our community and what's not. Any other remarks? Okay, and how about funding sources? So are we looking for funding sources in parks and open spaces in general on this one?
I would note that I believe the last 3 bullet points, funding sources, maintenance, and increasing park space in the city, were all things that Commissioner Chafe mentioned. Not to put you on the spot, but I think that's what my notes said.
That's fine. Yeah, so I think, again, these are things that have come up in the Parks and Rec Committee. So one thing that, just a background on funding sources, we've been trying to think really creatively on that committee about how we can increase park space in the city. As was mentioned in the public comment, we do have a lot of work to do to provide enough park space for residents in Emeryville. And as our population grows, that just gets more and more difficult in some ways. It's a good challenge. And so one of the things that comes up a lot is the fact that there used to be redevelopment funding available for acquisition of lots when the opportunity came up, and that just doesn't exist in the same form anymore. And so while the general plan, or I think it's actually the Parks and Rec plan, has well, no, both actually, I think, have spaces marked that would be great to expand for parks, expand park into those spaces or to create new parks. The opportunities to actually do that expansion are not very easy to come by right now. And so I think, this has come up before us because we kind of get a project by project basis proposal from developers for specific pieces of potential new parkland, but we're kind of lacking a city-provided source of funding to do things on our own terms in some ways, to put parks where we'd like to put them. So, I don't have the answers, but if anyone else does, that would be great. I'll leave it there for now.
Well, I wanted to ask Charlie, don't developers pay a fee for parks? Don't we collect money and how?
We do have a Parks and Recreation Development Impact Fee, which is based on square footage, and new development projects do have to pay that fee. There's also a provision where they can get a credit for that fee if they provide public open space that is called for in the Parks and Recreation Strategic Plan. If they provide that open space, then the City Council can approve a credit, so they don't have to pay the fee. So, there's at least two examples of that. One is the public market expanded Christie Avenue Park, which is in the Parks and Recreation Strategic Plan. So the Park and Rec impact fee was waived for them, and also Lennar for the Sherwin-Williams project. They're providing a lot of open space there, so they also got a waiver of the impact fee. But I would say that over the years since we've had it in place, which has been about 8 years now, the Park and Rec impact fee has been used primarily to fund Horton Landing Park, as well as a portion of the Ped Bike Bridge, the new Ped Bike Bridge over the railroad. It's also been used for a few other projects, but those are the major things it's been used for.
So we have collected funds and expended them for something?
Yes,
okay.
we have. Yes, we have.
I'm just sure it's never enough to buy a whole parcel and create a park out of it.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. And I think the maintenance thing might have been me. I don't know, Zoe, if you want to pick that up or if you want me to say something about that.
Yeah, go ahead. I'll just say one quick thing. I think there's been some, I don't know if I would say complaints, but like people noticing that some of the parks are just not in as good condition as they used to be, and wondering if it's a matter of city funding that's allocated towards maintenance. And I think maybe one of the reasons that this came up in our meeting is because sometimes, as Charlie mentioned, there's a collaboration between the city and a developer, and sometimes it can be kind of unclear to the public, at least, who's responsible for the maintenance of that space. Yeah. But Chair Keller, over to you.
Yeah, I agree totally with that. And that was my contention is we talk about funding sources to develop parks, and I'm all for developing as many parks as we can. But what concerns me, and it's a real issue where I work, that we have literally, without exaggeration, billions of dollars in deferred maintenance that's unfunded. And we're still building buildings. We're building a 14-story housing development. And it's like, okay, how do we maintain this thing when we can't maintain the 100-year-old buildings that we do have? And I see the same thing at the park. I have a unique perspective of Christie Park. And from my view, Christie Park is really deteriorated. When it was designed, the borders of that had a type of grass that was about 1.5 feet to 2 feet tall. And it kind of created this natural border from the inside of the park where people played and the outside of the park where the street is. That whole area is dead, totally dead. And it's the same way on the Greenway. The Greenway had clumps of grass that were 3 or 4 feet tall. Those are dead. And we now have an area totally devoid of, and whatever the reason is, I think on the Greenway, it's mainly pets, because you go through sections of that and it really smells like a latrine. But my point being is, and I mean, we can say thinking about Boyle Hollis, there's the terraced area that's kind of in the southwest corner that is supposed to have grass that's the tall clumping kind that you don't have to maintain. It's dead. And it's like every park in town does not look like the day it opened. It looks terrible. And my concern is if we develop more and more parks that we just let go to pot, then what are we getting? I mean, we have more open space, and Christie Park is being loved to death, but it's an amazingly great park, and I'm glad we have it. But my concern is, how are we going to maintain all these spaces? And that's particularly why I like Popo's, because you go up on that particular Popo's you're talking about on Hollis Street, it's always nice. The lawn's mowed, the flowers are gorgeous, you know, because it's a benefit to the property owner to keep that space up. But I just wanted to bring out the fact that I think maintenance is an issue, and the more parks we develop, it just seems like the more space that kind of must follow and that we can't take care of. And it's a concern that I'd like us to be mindful of and maybe find a way to address. Maybe part of the parks fee goes towards public works to fund specific, maintenance in parks or something like that. I don't know. Okay, if there's nothing else on that, other comments, we can go on to increasing park space in the city. Does that go back to you, Commissioner Chave?
I can take that one, sure. Yeah, so as I mentioned before, and was mentioned in the public comment, there is a ratio that we're working towards, park space per resident, and it's difficult to meet. And so, I'm trying to think about what's most useful as a discussion in our context. I think it's a question, like a pretty broad question of how do we increase park space in the city? I can give kind of an overview of some of the creative ways we've been thinking about it on the other committee, on the Parks and Rec committee, and Commissioner Gazzani, please chime in here as well. We've been looking for small pockets that could potentially become park space, whether it's through new uses of streets or through, kind of repurposing land that already belongs to the city, or looking at a lawn area that could potentially become, some other type of park to fit more users' needs. We even looked at whether it would be feasible to build something over a freeway in the southern part of Emeryville and create a new park space there in collaboration with other agencies. We were trying to think really out of the box, and it's really, really difficult. So I think one thing that we've come to realize on that committee is that we'll take any size park we can get. If we can eke out just a little bit more park space, that can serve a lot of people and it can help to fulfill our goal. So maybe just good for this committee or this commission to know where our conversations have been going on that. Commissioner Gazzani, anything else that you'd add?
And thank you, Commissioner Chave. I think that, the emphasis on micro parks is really big because those seem to be the opportunities we have. We've also discussed things like possibilities of using vacant parking areas as pop-up event things where you could have like a skating event or something like that. We're really looking for things, and to tie the expansion and the financing together. One thing that I find concerning too is we do have some things that have been identified as potential park spaces, such as the PG&E building along Hollis and the AC Transit space. And just given the tightness of our funding and our the problems we've been having with maintenance, I kind of wonder if those things ever become potentially available. I'm just concerned that will the city be prepared to actually take over acquiring one of those spaces, because something like the PG&E space could easily become a very long, partially indoor gym, partially outdoor. There's all kinds of architectural possibilities that you could do in either one of them. They would be huge jumps forward in terms of getting towards the ratio that we need. but I'm not sure that we would be prepared to do it. So things we could also be financially prepared for that are good.
Yeah, I think like what you're saying is just have ideas that are shovel ready. And I think, PG&E during the general plan update steering committee was definitely identified. And my thought has always been is maybe what we don't do is acquire the whole thing, but maybe we get a part of it, and we get, a half-acre park or something out rather than, I'm thinking maybe phase something in or something that is a little bit more affordable. The thing that scares me about the PG&E thing is, how dirty is that site? PCBs are used in transformers, and, does that site become $1 million site, to get a half-acre park just because you got to clean it up and things like that. So, but I think, that's a very large parcel of land, and we'd be very lucky to get that if we could put an indoor gym or something like that. But maybe look at taking the bits and pieces. The thing I think about is the park across from the Legaretto building is really not very used because there's just not a lot of residents there. But maybe if we tie that together, because I'm thinking the building across the street, which is kind of a warehouse for data switching for internet, has kind of a really cool plaza up there that no one really knows about, and it's not very well used. So could we approach that owner and do a joint venture and create that as a purpose and tie those two together a little bit more? But I like the way, your committee is thinking out of the box. And I think that's the only way we're going to get more parks in Emeryville is to come up with ideas. But I think I agree with you. I think we need to be shovel ready so that we can go to grant funding, and partnerships and have ideas. And I think the way you guys say that we're thinking out of the box, I think is the only way we're going to do it. And I really commend you guys for doing that. Okay, are there any other Commissioner Joanne?
Is it possible we use the top floor of the parkings that we had earlier in the agenda as an open space or green space?
I think that's something we could ask for. So maybe have the developer do a propose on those?
Yes, existing ones or the new ones, Because you showed us some pictures that were empty whole day.
Yep.
What if we can make them to open space, green space that people can come and use?
Yep.
And they already have the elevator,
Yeah, and it's pretty much, it's not a secure building like a lab is. Anyone can pretty much go into those elevators now as it is. Yeah, that could be another thing we could look for. I definitely agree. I think say out of the box places, we're only 1.2 square miles, so we're going to run out of space eventually. There'll be nothing more to develop if we ever get the bus yard and MPGD. But so I think, it's really commendable that we're thinking out of the box. Okay, can we close the items on parks and open space? Okay, and quickly I could go through 5.5. That was something I brought up, and I pretty much during the commission meeting last time when I brought this. Oh, go ahead,
Public comment?
Oh, yes, thank you. So are there any public comment? This is the time that we'll open public comment to anybody wishing to speak to the commission on the below market rate commercial space. Are there any speakers?
I have no online speaker cards, and there are no raised hands among the attendees.
Okay, we will close the public comment period. Bring it back to me. So what I was thinking on this, and I think I brought up everything, is I've just, everybody likes the idea of what they call local serving business. And I think the term should be independent, small retailers that normally can't afford, once a new building is built, they can't afford to go back into it. And I think we've lost a lot of really unique business. Semi-Freddy's, there is a wholesale florist on what is now the empty site B. There is a pasta producer on that same site. Potentially we have the possibility of losing a very popular gym that I didn't know anything about, and it's not just for children, it's for adults. On San Pablo, if the owner of that should ever develop the project like they had thought to bring us. So there's a lot of missed opportunity, I think, for that. We lose existing businesses in Emeryville because what's taken the place of where they used to be is no longer affordable or built towards them. So I'm just wondering if there's something we could look into to create a incentive to bring below market rate commercial spaces, and maybe that's something that someone can get bonus points for, reduce fees for, something like that. So it's just something, it's really broad. I don't know if we want to address that along with everything else. But I think as we see more and more properties redeveloped and we lose space, we might want to look at ways of keeping places. Or we have a lot of empty spaces right now. You know, down the street from us, we have an empty corner shop where Subway used to be. And I was thinking if maybe the city could subsidize that property owner for maybe the first year to get someone in there, or, you know, again, get creative, come up with ideas that we haven't used before, use some of our, you know, fees that we have to subsidize things that we haven't done before. So that's it in a nutshell. You know, do we want to think about how to keep small businesses or encourage? We don't have a bike shop in this town. You know, it would be nice if, you know, we could afford to subsidize a bike shop for a year and get them on their feet or something like that. So that's all I had on that idea. Something to put in your cap and think about as time goes on. And so our last subject would be the future of Emeryville skyline, and I believe that was Commissioner Dram.
I did briefly see Commissioner Simon's hand.
Oh, I'm sorry. Henry, do I keep ignoring you?
No, it's so, I was like, oh, do I really want to say something if nobody else is? Whatever, I'll say something. Thanks, Chair Keller. I'm really interested in this topic. One topic I'm particularly interested in is requiring developers to have smaller commercial spaces. When I think about Temescal Alley in Temescal, obviously, which is so great, those stores are like 200 square feet. Like, you're an entrepreneur, you want to go sell earrings or donuts or whatever. Like, it's a much, much less risky investment. Obviously, that's a particularly well-suited space in a nice neighborhood, blah, blah, blah. But smaller commercial retail, very, very interested in requiring the ground floor of these places to have smaller places. So it's just less of a risk for somebody to sign a lease. So.
Well, it also would be less of a risk of the developer because he's putting in less square foot to dedicate to that. So it would be something that would be feasible to them because it would be, you know, a smaller commitment to doing that. Yeah, I like any idea, and I think Temescal is a great example, and a great example of doing something like that. So thank you for bringing that up, Commissioner Gitson.
Yes, I have a couple of things. One, I would like to thank you, Chair Keller, and what Chair. Commissioner Simons, with exactly what you were saying. I think smaller spaces really, one, spaces are large, that kind of stacks it towards bigger businesses, and so smaller businesses don't have a chance. But I also think that you have a lot of warehousing of space, and it goes on for a long time. I believe in San Francisco recently, they put a tax on space that has been vacant for over 6 months, and I think that incentivizing developers and owners to not just leave spaces sitting vacant until one day a big rent tenant comes along is not a bad thing. And the other thing is, I think particularly with retail playing less of a role, with online retail and everything, it's good to imagine other purposes. And I think of spaces like something like Omni Commons, which is used by a lot of social activists and arts and cultural groups, keep seeming to go through there. To have spaces that are available for community-oriented groups as well that aren't necessarily commercial in nature might be a good thing as well. And
yeah, it could be used. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, the last thing is I think that spaces like that are ideal for incubators, business incubators, and so teaming with something like La Cocina, which Public Market seems to get a lot of La Cocina developed, you know, culinary businesses and things like that. Partnering with organizations that are geared towards promoting incubation of new businesses might help too.
I think those are all great ideas, and I agree with that. I think, you know, the idea that comes to mind are pop-up spaces. Rent them for a month. You know, let somebody try a business or get exposure. Maybe they have a business in Berkeley that no one here knows about, so they open for a month just to get people familiar with it. And I think it's going, like you said, retail as we knew it is changing. I don't think it's going to totally go away, but I don't think we're going to see streets and streets like 4th Street fill out again, you know, in areas. So I think we need to look at different uses. And I think community rooms, you know, to let people come and have a meeting, I think those are great ideas that were those brought to us before. So yeah, I think smaller spaces are going to make those more viable, both for the landlord and for anyone that would rent it. So I think those are really, really great ideas. So I think that's something, the commission may want to take on some time and talk to the council about, maybe incentivizing through a bonus point system or something like that. Okay, do we want to move on to the future of Emeryville Skyline and open that up to public comment and see if there is anyone who would like to address the commission on the future of Emeryville Skyline?
I do not have any online speaker cards on this item, and I do not see any raised hands among the attendees.
Okay, very good. So Commissioner Dram, I believe this was your item?
Yes, that was my item. I think I bring it earlier and nobody say anything. Thank you. Nice. So same thing. Yeah, about the skyline, future of a skyline.
So is there anything you'd like to talk about on that? Or I know Charlie included something.
I can share my screen and just show you what I included from the general plan.
All right.
Sorry, let me just find it here. Here we go. Okay. All right, here we go. So these are the guiding principles from the general plan, and my kitty wants to chime in. Here's one of the item number 10, guiding principle number 10 is an imageable and memorable city, and I highlighted this sentence: the city will foster a dramatic skyline of slender and elegant high-rise buildings, stepping down to low-rise buildings in the older residential neighborhoods. Then there are these computer models in the general plan where I believe the blue represents hypothetical possible future buildings. The yellow are buildings that at the time of the general plan adoption were either under construction or proposed. And then the beige were existing buildings. So all of the blue is what could potentially be built under the general plan. I know there was a lot of concern about the Manhattanization, if you will, of Emeryville. And the point of this was to show that there would be some high rises, but they wouldn't be there wouldn't be a ton of them, and they would be, somewhat spaced apart. So to create a skyline, but not a real dense kind of Manhattan kind of environment. And this is what it would look like basically from above the Bay Bridge. And this is an actual skyline view across the water, where the tan actually represents existing buildings and the blue represents potential new buildings. And then there's a section on skyline and building bulk, picture of the skyline, and there's some discussion about that. And then there are some policies that relate to skyline and building bulk. So that's basically what the general plan has to say about the future of the Emeryville skyline.
I was going to say, before you unshare that, I was going to have you leave up the image of the 3D image of the skyline and see if anyone had any comments or questions.
Want me to go back to that?
Yeah, we'll do that. I just think that provides a visual if anyone wants to start a discussion on that.
Uh-oh.
What'd the cat do?
She didn't do it. It's not her fault. I closed the screen. Let me get back to it.
Okay, well, while he's coming up, I mean, it may be for moot, but does anyone have any thoughts or feelings on what the general plan lays out? Anything that we think would be nice to be different or add to? Come on, Henry, you have something?
Nothing to add on this one. All good. People close together, good.
I think this is the image you were referring to.
That works. Yeah, any of them are pretty good. So, Commissioner Dram, is there anything in particular that maybe both those like that's perfect?
Yeah. So with the project we have at the bonus point that the project are getting, it seems that there's no limit on them. And is it something that they're following with these proposed skyline, or they can override it? are we gonna like plan for it or just leave it as is?
Let me just caution that we shouldn't discuss projects that are currently pending before the commission. But having said that,
Future projects.
yeah, having said that, these computer models are purely illustrative. They don't represent any actual proposed developments. It was simply intended to illustrate what could potentially happen with the general plan criteria. And there is, as you know, a height map in the general plan, as well as a floor area ratio map and a residential density map, and any new development project would need to comply with those. Of course, development bonus points are always available, and in the central core area of downtown Emeryville,
Yeah.
if you will, central core area of Emeryville around Powell and Christie, there is no ultimate height limit. But projects, of course, are subject to floor area ratio and other criteria that have the effect of limiting their height. But there is no ultimate height limit.
Right. And just to add on to that was, you know, having my husband who was involved in the general plan and myself attending many meetings, it was a bone of contention to talk about height and et cetera, and to put limits or not limits and stuff. So it was always, and Charlie, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was the idea that from Christie, kind of where Powell Street Plaza is, all the way north to the end of the city, and on this side of the railroad tracks primarily, was the area that the general plan and the general plan committee saw any type of height. Is that correct?
I'm not sure I follow exactly what you're describing. It basically is centered around Powell and Christie and goes a few blocks to the south of Powell and a few blocks to the north of Powell.
Right. So the few blocks south would take in Powell Street Plaza and where the Sheridan Hotel is.
Right.
Yeah. And then north would be up to our building, up to PPP at a little, you know, maybe a little past, but I think that site is now, I think we always saw the Nady site as a possibility.
Well, and yeah, I would say there's also two other corners of the city that may be included in the potential high-rise district, and that would be up at the Nady site, north of 65th and Shell Mount, and then south down at the west end of the East Bay Bridge Shopping Center.
Right, that was the next thing that was another possibility along the I-80 corridor on the south of that. That was another potential area that they could see height.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right. Although that's not really indicated in these computer models.
Right. So Commissioner Dram, just to give you an idea, what we're seeing here is just what the people who are doing the general plan course kind of threw out to kind of imagine this is what, you know, several high-rise buildings, but none of these purple things were anybody's ideas of a project. It was just kind of, if we went with this idea of what we're suggesting, this is how the skyline could develop. And everyone, Charlie was very right. There were very concerned about Manhattanizing the skyline, meaning that we would have high-rise after high-rise all along the freeway. And I think there was much intention that we didn't, you know, encourage that, but that there would be height, and this is where it would be.
That's right.
Okay. Any questions or anything on? Yeah, you go ahead and close everything before.
Okay.
Done with that, thank you. Anything else on the skyline from anybody? Okay, and before we wrap it up, is there anything anyone would like to go back to and discuss further, tag on to, or we're about ready to wrap it up? We could do so and finish this meeting in 3 hours if we'd like. But I'm certainly open to hear if there's any closing remarks on anything, or are we all good? And Charlie, this might be for futures then, but I don't know if, you know, the commission, if I remember correctly, had 2 items that they thought they might like to follow up on. And I don't know if you were able to capture those, or if someone with the commission is going to bring those back up again.
Well, I heard potentially job housing balance in the general plan annual report. And what was the other one?
I don't know that I remember. I'll look and see if I, oops. Was it the parks to try to identify opportunities and be ready for being able to apply for grant funding or anything like that?
I would say I I could have missed it, but I don't believe I heard anything in the discussion tonight that was specific enough. I heard a lot of good, robust, interesting, intelligent discussion around various issues, but I did not hear anything that was specific enough to be formulated into a action to put on a future planning commission agenda.
Okay. So other than you thought it wouldn't take a action on the commission to get the report on the job housing annually, right?
No, we can staff can do that.
Okay. Okay, so what I would recommend is that if anyone on the commission thinks that there's something they would like to flesh out, that maybe next month or at another meeting in the commissioner comments that you ask for something to be added on the agenda that would address those items. But right now, we're not going to push anything forward to staff and ask for an item to be agendized. That we're just kind of discuss some ideas, and if we want to follow further on it, we'll need to do so at a future meeting, right?
That sounds right to me.
Okay. So are there any other planning commissioner comments on anything else that anyone would like to make? Okay, 3, 2, 1, we're going to adjourn the meeting at 9:30. And I thank everyone for being available to do this special meeting. I think it was a good discussion, and I thank you all for your input.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay, we are adjourned.